Good afternoon, everybody. I am calling the regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order for Thursday, September 5th, 2019. Ms. Rydell, would you call roll, please?
Thank you, Chair Wiscombe. Chair Wiscombe?
Here.
Vice Chair Jordan? Absent. Commissioner Campanella?
Here.
Commissioner Higgins?
Here.
Commissioner Lodge?
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz?
Here.
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Vice Chair Jordan is absent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rydell. I'd like to just take a little departure and just have a moment of silence for the victims of the conception and our sympathies to their families and friends who have lost their loved ones. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 2, preliminary matters. 2A, request for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items. Ms. DeBusk.
No requests, thank you.
Okay, and how about announcements and appeals?
I do have one announcement. The project at 302 through 308 East Montecito Street, which was denied by the Planning Commission on August 15th, has been appealed to the City Council, and the hearing date has been set as November 19th.
Okay, thank you very much for that. November 19th. Okay, great. Okay, item number 2C, review and consideration action on the following draft Planning Commission minutes and resolutions. We have the Planning Commission minutes from August 8th, 2019, and the resolution number 011-19 for 2327 Edgewater Way. Does anyone need that taken separately? Okay, is there any corrections or additions to the minutes as proposed? Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Schwartz, second by Commissioner Lodge. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay. Commissioner Higgins abstains. Okay. And then we're going to move to the Planning Commission draft minutes from August 15th, 2019, and the Planning Commission resolution number 012-19, 302 and 308 West Montecito Street. Does anyone have any corrections to that? Okay, actually I do, if I may, if you'll indulge me for just 1 minute here. I think that I would like to read directly under the motion. I think that the text should be revised to state, and I quote, deny the project on the basis that all of the findings cannot be made, so we add the words all of, the findings cannot be made, with the following comments from the 5 commissioners supporting the motion, so adding from the 5 commissioners supporting the motion. So that would be one revision that I'd like to see. And then in the second one, I was confused by who actually stated that the style of modern architecture was not appropriate or compatible. I felt that perhaps this should be stricken from our record because it's really under the purview of ABR to deal with the design of the building. But so those would be my 2 comments. If anyone has any other discussion. Yes, Commissioner Schwartz.
Madam Chair, I'm recalling that one of our 2 findings was neighborhood compatibility, separate from sound community planning, and I recall that my comments, perhaps to your reference, were that I could not make the findings of neighborhood compatibility in part due to the architectural style.
Okay.
But perhaps staff wants to further comment in reviewing the tape. But certainly neighborhood compatibility was required as a finding, and we denied the project, so we could not make that finding.
So we'll leave that in. I wasn't sure who made it. And then, so how about my first one to change that sentence?
I move to change it as
Okay.
you
So are you
expressed.
moving the minutes as revised?
Yeah, as
Okay.
revised with that addition.
With that addition, okay.
Change.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second?
Okay, so moved by Commissioner Lodge, seconded by Commissioner Schwartz. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And any abstentions?
Abstain, Higgins.
Okay, Commissioner Higgins abstains. Okay, so that carries. So we move on to item number 2D, which is comments from members of the public pertaining to items not on this agenda. Due to time constraints, each person is limited to 2 minutes. So Anna Marie Gott, this is for general public comment, and how many slips do you have?
Just one. You can give me one if you like.
No, I was going to tell you, because I know sometimes you come up here with 3 or 4 slips, so we are going to start limiting general public comment to 2 minutes, so just so you know. Okay, so welcome.
Thank you, Commissioners. As you know, I have actually gone to the Planning Department recently over the course of the last few weeks, and there's been numerous occasions in which I have actually been denied access to the meeting materials for the agendas scheduled for the Planning Commission. That is a Brown Act violation to begin with, and I believe that we need to actually have this matter brought to the City Council so that we can ensure that all materials are going to be made available to the public in a timely fashion. I believe actually what we should be doing with regards to anything that is going to be heard at the ABR or the HLC or Planning Commission or any other body should actually be posted 10 days in advance with all materials. And that includes design files. If you received my email last night, you would actually find that the City of Carpinteria, a few days ago, I apologize, the City of Carpinteria can actually post not only their deemed complete letters from staff, but their design files online, which is great. The email that I sent you last night came as a result of the fact that I went yet again to the Planning Department yesterday to look at files. I was not able to access everything. When I finally was able to take photos, I found out that there were PDFs of the actual design files, and I was handed them on a thumb drive. Why in the world those PDFs were not accessible on the city's website in advance of this meeting, I don't know. But what I do know is that I have personally experienced, as have others, an inability to actually gain materials that are relevant to projects. And I would appreciate it if you would demand that all of these materials be put on the websites. Thank you.
You can have another 20 seconds if you want, because I forgot to turn your mic on, and I apologize. So.
Okay, well, you were saying that you're going to be limiting people to time, so you would need to actually schedule and agendize that to change your meeting minutes determination for your guidelines. So, thank you.
It's general public comment, and it's actually stated. It's what I state at the beginning. Each person is limited to 2 minutes. It's only for general public comment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone else for general public comment? Okay, seeing no one, I do want to acknowledge general public correspondence from Anna Marie Gott, who just spoke, an email dated September 3rd with a follow-up email dated September 4th. So that will, please let the record reflect that. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know just how the procedure should work, but this has been a problem for decades, where members of the ABR, the HLC, and the public can't see anything until it's spread out in front of the commissioners, and how do we proceed? If Carpinteria can do it, how do we proceed to get the city to be able to do it? And, you know, I've gone to request plans sometimes and been told, well, the planner has them and, you know, they're working on them. They print out, you know, couldn't they print out an extra copy to have at the desk? And so what would be the next step, is my question, in making sure this happens?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Lodge, we can't really get into a long discussion about it, but I
No,
know that
I know that.
But I know that staff will can address your concerns and let you know how we can fix that and why we do it the way we do presently.
Okay, thank you.
May I?
Commissioner
Maybe a
Higgins.
Lunch meeting discussion, so it can be agendized.
Good, I didn't have to warn you. Boy. It's easy. Okay, thank you. So we'll close general public comment, and we're going on to item number 3A, which is a recommendation to council. This item is the Planning Commission's review and recommendation to City Council on the proposed zoning text amendments to the Zoning Information Report Program found in various sections of Titles 28 and 30 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code. And are we starting with Ms. Reardon? Or
Yes, thank you.
welcome.
Chair Wiscombe, members of the Planning Commission. Ariel Colon, our city attorney, is going to give a background information, and then I'll follow up with the main provisions of the ordinance. So I'll turn it over to Ariel.
In order to avoid completely duplicating the staff report discussion of background, I'm going to add a couple of perspective pieces too, really apropos of the comments you just heard about the plans in front of the design bodies. The background here is that last March, Mr. Hart submitted an initiative petition to repeal all references to the ZIR program, both in that ordinance and in the what I would call accommodation ordinances you've passed on over the years to soften the impact of some of the negative parts of the ZIR program. When those petitions are submitted, a couple of things happen. First, the clerk sends it to me to prepare a title and summary that goes out to the potential petition signers along with all of the petitions so that they have the view of an impartial official about what this thing is. So as an example, when the title came in, the self-titled name of this initiative was the Homeowners Fairness Initiative. And of course, that was less explanatory. So the title that went out was that this was simply about repealing ZIRs. Having done that, sufficient signatures were gathered to put it on the agenda. Our time schedule became somewhat compressed, however, because of essentially vacation schedules in July. So we didn't get to the City Council until mid-July with the certification of the number of signatures and the next steps. With an initiative, those next steps are very important. When the elections official through the City Council certifies that there are sufficient signatures, three things can happen. One, the council could put it on the ballot. B, the council could adopt it without change. Or C, the council can ask its departments to prepare a report on what the initiative means. Now, that state code section doesn't have a fancy name. We just call it a 9212 report. When you look at the list of issues that are potentially discussed in a 9212 report, the first issue is general plan consistency. And the reason is this. In the 90s, there was growing antipathy to ballot box planning, or what has been termed ballot box planning. Typically, growth control initiatives in suburban, bedroom, suburb-type communities that were largely exclusionary in effect, if not in intent. So the 9212 report was meant to be a means for the city council to get a report from its departments about what the impact of this repeal would be. Now, certainly we don't have issues of the social dimension of excluding people who can't afford certain levels of housing, but nonetheless, reviewing consistency with the general plan is at the top of the checklist. So the question is, when does that happen? And typically in the 9212 report is when it happened. To staff's surprise, in mid-July, when this came to the council for certification of signatures, they were ready to vote to repeal the ZIR program entirely from the books. That caught us all by surprise, and it forced me to tick off in the meeting that day the issue about general plan consistency being something we needed to look at. So we said to the City Council, we'll come back to you in a week with the documents necessary to effect this repeal you want to do. That will be within the time frame the elections law gives you for doing one of those three things I mentioned earlier that the City Council can do. When we came back in a week, our collective conclusion as staff was actually hardened, I think, in believing that the general plan incorporates the ZIR program in a way that repeal of it implicates consistency with the general plan. So the concern was that a wholesale repeal of the ZIR program would compel a companion general plan amendment as well. The next step became searching for alternatives, and that political function, as I recall, was fulfilled with council members Harmon and Rouse working with the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. Please keep in mind that state law was also amended a few years ago to allow the initiative proponent to withdraw an initiative, and the significance of that is it allows for, and it was intentionally designed to allow for, some discussion between the city council members and the initiative proponents. There was concern by the city council that that happened quickly and that it didn't happen in public. I would respectfully submit that there's almost no other way to do it, given the timelines under the election law, other than quickly and mostly not in public. I'm confident that less than a quorum of the city council was involved in the discussion. So roll forward a week and we're back to the city council with several options. And that's a long background to why this was referred to you to initiate a zone text amendment. The compromise was essentially that the parts of the ZIR program that required the use of human judgment were highly subject to human error would be taken away. Now, with that as a very long introduction, just real briefly, I want to talk about the two interesting things that relate to what Ms. Gott talked about. I think of the ZIR program like any other government information gathering program, whether it's crop reports or satellite images of hurricanes. It is beneficial to the economy for the government to pump as much information out as it possibly can. Why? In this context, the information provided by the city's records that comprise the body of the ZIR are extraordinarily valuable in the real estate transaction to assure that that arm's length deal is being negotiated by fully informed parties. So it improves the efficiency of the economic transaction. I've found consistently that the input of neutral information into almost any transaction improves the efficiency of that transaction. So people get the numbers right, is what I'm saying, when you pump in as much information as you can. That's one value of the ZIR program that is very important. And it does suggest that when we have the technological ability, we should put out as much information as we can and should be as open about it. Those are policy objectives that the state has defined and the people in 2004 added to the California Constitution. So I think of ZIRs as another disclosure tool, and the hope is that what they do is lead to smarter economic transactions in the marketplace. If you think of that as consumer protection, so be it. And that's more than I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colon. Ms. Breeden.
Okay, with
Thank
that,
you.
I'll go over the proposed amendments. And they're included in Exhibit D of your staff report, and that starts on page 67. And so as Ariel said, the proposed amendments amend various sections of Title 28 and 30 relating to the ZIR program and associated procedures. It also repeals Santa Barbara Municipal Code 28.92.130, which is the section we recently added in regards to minor zoning exceptions for errors in ZIRs. Since we're no longer requiring ZIRs, that section's not necessary. So the main provisions they're mainly on page 67 and 68 for Title 28, and then on 81 and 82 for Title 30. Since we have Title 28 that's in effect in the coastal zone, we need to amend that consistent with Title 30, which is the non-coastal zone. So first, what the ordinance does is it defines a ZIR as just the records contained within the street and planning files. And it specifies the content of the ZIR is only a copy of the city records. Staff will no longer do a physical inspection of the property, nor will we provide any review or opinion when we transmit that information to the public. And then the city will provide the seller and owner with the ZIR within 10 business days of receiving the request. And we've changed that slightly because you received a letter from the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors requesting changes to the number of days. And in order for staff to provide the physical copy, whether it's electronic or digital, we do need that amount of time to be able to duplicate it and put it together. So we've changed it minor. Did you guys receive a copy? Okay. So we changed it, and it's on page 68, and the companion would be on page 81 or 82 for Title 30. But what we're proposing is that an owner or owner's authorized representative may obtain a zoning information report by accessing the zoning information report webpage on the official City of Santa Barbara website. So if this were to go forward, we would further modify our webpage so that a link's easily provided and found to be able to access the city records. And then if the owner or the buyer wants a physical copy, they can make a request with the community development director, and then we would have the 10 days to pull that information together. And there'd be no charge for the digital copy, but a hard copy would be required to pay our typical duplication fee.
And Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners, just for the record, at your places are the proposed changes, and we've placed the proposed changes in the back as well for the public to review.
Those changes for me in the back room. Okay, so another main provision is that the ordinance states that the ZIR shall be provided to the buyer within 5 days of entering into agreement of sale, and that was another concern that the Board of Realtors expressed, that 5 days is not adequate, that the typical time period for disclosures is 7. So we agreed, and we have proposed to change that to 7 days. And then, as I said, the owner or seller may provide the ZIR to the buyer as a physical copy or a web link. And that physical copy, again, could be either a hard copy or an electronic copy. And then no city inspection or opinion will occur as part of the preparation or transmittal of the ZIR. If a buyer, like any person in the city of Santa Barbara, has questions regarding the contents of the planning file or street file, once they review it, they could come to our public counter, just like any other member of the public, and we, city staff could help them with any questions they may have. So in order for any general plan amendment or zoning ordinance to be approved or adopted, it needs to be found consistent with our general plan as well as the city charter. And as Ariel stated, there is a housing element policy that pertains to ZIRs, and that was policy H2 regarding property improvements. And the related implementation strategy is H20.4, and it states that the city shall continue to require the zoning information reports when the residential units change ownership. And a review of the draft ordinance, the ZIR is still required, and it's still providing information to the buyer, and that the buyer can make an informed decision on what type of improvements are necessary and choose which ones to do. In regards to city charter consistency, so Charter Section 1507 states in part that it's the policy of the city that its land development shall not exceed its public services and physical and natural resources. And in making land use decisions, including general plan amendments or zoning ordinance amendments, the city needs to be guided by these policies as set forth in that section. And given that this zoning ordinance amendment does not change the development potential of the city, it could be found consistent with that charter section. This charter section also requires 5 affirmative votes for the ordinance to go into effect by the council. So our recommendation today is to review and consider the zoning text amendments and then forward your recommendation on them to the city council. I would like to just point out to the people that are here, we have scheduled this ordinance for ordinance committee review on September 17th, and then it will be followed by a review for potential introduction by the city council on the September 24th. And so any recommendations you give today, we will forward it to both the ordinance committee and the city council. And then I do have a link to the text amendments, but I'm sorry, I just received them revised too, so I don't have that for the people in the audience. That concludes my presentation.
Chair Wiscombe, if
Thank
I
you.
could jump in and just further clarify with regards to the amendments that you just received to the zoning ordinance. We received the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors letter, and so I met with staff this morning to discuss their proposed changes to the existing or what was proposed in the agenda. And staff was generally receptive of the 7-day disclosure period, and wanted to encourage the applicants to be able, or the sellers, the owners of the property, to be able to have immediate access to the zoning information report. And that's why the change where stating that the owner can go and get to the website without having to have any contact with staff and satisfy their disclosure requirement by taking that link and then providing it to the seller, or to the buyer. And so the buyer has immediate access to the records. If the seller wanted a hard copy, they could, from the city, if the seller wanted the hard copy, they could come and request it, but they'd be getting exactly the same thing that they could get from that web link, and they would be paying a cost for that. So that's why staff also decided that they wanted to stay with the 10 business days for the record disclosure in case there was a lot of requests for records and they couldn't get to it immediately, that they would have some time, particularly in light of the fact that it is available to the seller immediately. So I just wanted to give that background. And then one further thing, in talking with staff today, they informed me that the plans, including the planning file plans, are not contained in the electronic street file or planning file, so they were proposing to amend the section in the definition of zoning information report where it talks about excluding building plans maintained by the building official and simply stating all plans and clarifying it. And those plans are available for the public to review, and this is our standard practice, to come in and request review of the plans, but under the government code, we can't create or produce without these plans without satisfying certain copyright provisions.
So are you saying that under item number 4 on page 68 of our agenda packet, that you're eliminating the provision excluding building plans maintained by the building official and exempt from duplication pursuant to state statute?
It would simply read excluding all plans.
Excluding all plans?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you, Ms. Ostranger and Ms. Reardon, Mr. Colon. Okay, Commissioner Thompson had his light on earlier, so you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Colon. While I don't disagree with your line of reasoning on how to proceed with this, I'm kind of curious as to why the idea of doing a general plan amendment was discarded immediately in the beginning. I think the state law still allows 4 GPAs a year, so, I mean, we do them from time to time.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Thompson, I think that was fundamentally a political decision based on the confidential advice I gave the council on how to go about it. I will say that this was also the fastest path to assuring the initiative proponents that the council would do what it said it was going to do, and that was a concern with the upcoming election. We're also operating quite awkwardly, really, under an administrative suspension of the program right now, so it behooved the council to get this rolling again as quickly as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Higgins.
Comment about, or the change with respect to plans not being furnished in the ZIR. I don't want to make it more complicated than it already is. This whole, the basis for us being here is because this thing is out of control, or grew out of control with complicated components. So, but, you know, when I want to go get some documentation on property, shouldn't we just exclude those that are subject to copyright? Because you have plans that come into the development permit application that are drawn not by an architect, that aren't subject to copyright, that would be helpful, or maybe explain your rationale.
Because the planning files occasionally contain design review drawings, not just building plans, and they wouldn't may not be subject to, or they'd be drafts, to the copyright exclusions, and they're not contained. We don't contain them in our electronic format. So it would be a different product than what we could provide on a web link.
Chair Wiscombe.
And it's not typically provided, Ms. Reardon can speak to this, but I don't believe that those plans would be provided in a previous ZIR, but they are available if the public came to wanted to ask for them.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you just want a quick question right now, and then I have other questions later. So back to Ms. Ostranger, I want to see if I understand. Let's start with the Association of Realtors letter, if we could, since you referenced that. Number 2 in their letter, which addresses section 28.87.220C2, their requested change from 10 business days is to 5 business days. Could you go back over staff's position on that? So the sentence reads, the Community Development Department will provide the zoning information report within, and currently it's written as 10 business days from receipt of a request. The association is asking for that to be 5 business days.
Yes, I can.
This is from their letter.
Yes, Chair Wisdom, Commissioner Schwartz. In meeting with staff was concerned that just based on a backlog, they wouldn't be able to produce the paper hard copy record that it would be immediately available to the seller online in 10 days. If there was just some sort of a city holiday closure, for example, when we close the city for a furlough during the holiday season, they were concerned that they may not be able to meet that timeline. And they felt that because it was available on immediately to the seller, that they really wanted the extra protection of not blowing a deadline and being able to timely provide. And they plan on providing them as soon as possible, same day if they could. But that's why it's a policy decision. It's not a legal one, but that's...
Yes, I understand.
That's where they were coming from.
Okay. So just to tee this up, my follow-on question after public comment will be what the right number of days is. This is more of an art than a science, given that from my experience there are discrepancies between what we have digitized and what we have in our written street and planning files. So if we're relying on only providing, let's say, in a very short period of time, 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour turnaround, a web link, that information may not actually suffice for every document that's in the street and planning file. So I'll get to that when we talk later. So that's going to be a question and a potential concern I have about saying you can get it through this vehicle or that vehicle or this means or that means, but the means aren't actually comparable from my experience, or they're not identical. So we'll get, I want to allow for public comment, but I'm just teeing this up in terms of whether it's 5 or 10 days. So we can talk about that later.
Okay.
Well, if staff or Ms. Ostringer can address the question now.
Sure. So I can say the records custodian has told me that they scan all the files, and that's what is in the paper file is in the street file, is in the electronic file. And with regards to the way we've drafted this, it's not a Public Records Act request. It's crafted as a zoning information report and defined specifically as basically our electronic files. So we can produce them. They might not be produced in exactly the same chronological order, but the documents would be produced as they are in the street file, just not in the same order necessarily.
Okay, well, perhaps if the association is going to come up during comment, you could speak, kind of expound upon this further, why you think that the 5 business days versus 10 is important. If you could help us with that. Thank you. That's it for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear, the zoning information report, let's say the initial one on a property would be generated when there's a request made by the seller of a property. Is that the first time one would appear on the city website?
Chair Whitcomb, Commissioner Campanella, there won't be any documented ZIR like there is right now. So we will probably have some type of affidavit signed by the buyer and seller saying that that information was provided. But in terms of an actual report, like what we used to have the ZIRs, that won't be within the file because the ZIR now will be the contents of the file. So we don't want to make a copy of the file and put it in the file.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to access the website, is there information that's drawn upon that request from the files that creates a summary? Is that the only thing that occurs, or is there a physical summary that stays on the website?
No, it will just be, if you've ever gone on our city website, there's the property database, and you type in your address and you say what kind of file you want all the documents or not, that's what's going to pop up. So it's going to be the contents of the street file and the planning file. Sometimes it is rather cumbersome because we've changed our database scanning capabilities several times, and so one property may have one file to check, and another one might have 5 or 10 just because of when the documents were scanned and added to the street file. So there's not going to be a summary or anything. This is just something that they're going to access online.
Okay, so that's public information. So anyone can access that information if
Correct.
They would like to know about a property, and that's always going to be available to the public.
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
You can
thank
go
you.
check on your neighbor right now if you wanted to.
Thank you. I have one other question, too. Just looking back and forth between red lines, there were a couple of sections that were, a couple of references that were taken out on violation of law sections that do not appear as red lines. I think, if I have this correctly, if we go to page 70 of 130, towards the top, after the line out of the first paragraph, there was a paragraph E that was violation of law. That's not in here anymore, but it doesn't show as a strikeout. That would be under 2887-220. There was a paragraph E that came, now there's just a blank between D and F, which shows the strikeouts. I presume that's been taken out, but I didn't know if there was some reason why it wasn't shown as a strikeout. On page 70. Okay. On page 69 of 130, there's a section that's D that's crossed out. If you flip to the next page, after that's finished, there's a F is crossed out. There had been an E on violation of law that's not shown as a strikeout, right there. Yeah.
So I don't have the same page numbers that you do, or I don't have it in
Okay,
a
well,
page stamp.
that's what we're talking about. There's no E anymore. E is a cross-out. That was contained in the original,
If it was contained in the original and it just...
It's
was
on
accidentally
page
deleted.
4 of the ordinance that we're looking at, the proposed ordinance.
yeah, if you scroll down, okay.
So
Yeah.
if it may have been just unfortunately removed, and not have a strike through, but if that's the case, I'll
The
check
intent-
when I get back to the office, and if it
Okay,
does
but the intent was to
need to go,
remove all of
yes.
that. Okay, I just, tracing one to the other, I want to know if there was a reason for not showing it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. I just had one question on language. I'm on page, okay, you don't have the numbered pages. It's 81 of 130 in our packet, and it is page 15. And it's under, it's section, it's in Title 30, 285.040, item number C. There is, actually, I'm going to refer back, but there is a line in here that says there will be no fee, but, or there is no fee, for providing a web link to the zoning information report. So that same sentence I couldn't find on page 69, which would be Title 28, under the same section. I don't think that's there. So is there a reason why it's not there? Or?
Chair Winscombe, that actually is there, and that's the
Oh, there it
one, the
is.
change that we've just passed out to you. So this is the
Oh, okay,
companion
okay.
section in Title 30
Okay.
that's going to be updated per the language.
Yeah,
that
I
was
didn't
given.
have time. I was listening to your explanation, but I didn't have time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
that's
so
fine.
that's all taken care of, because that was my only question there. Okay, great. So I think we're through with questions, and I think we'll go to public comment. We have several speakers on this item, and we'll start with Thomas Schultheis. You have 2 minutes up here. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon and thank you. I'm Thomas Schultheis, President of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. Thanks for taking the time to review this item today. We're requesting that you recommend the proposed changes to the ZIR program with our minor modifications. Currently, the ordinance states that the ZIR disclosure period is 5 days. We are asking for modifications regarding this disclosure timing because we default seller disclosure period within a real estate transaction is 7 days. So we felt an alignment with the timing was important for the standard of practice in California. We want everything to be consistent. We wanted to thank the staff and recognize them for understanding that this alignment was important for us. and that providing valuable and accurate information was important to the public. We had not heard about an affidavit. I looked up several street files today on properties I don't have listed or in escrow, so this information is available and will be provided to buyers and sellers in a timely manner from their agents, and we do encourage all buyers and sellers to utilize that resource even today and print them off from their own computers if necessary. We've been traveling the ZIR road for over 10 years, and we're grateful and encouraged that the city and SBAOR have found a reasonable solution that not only improves and refines the process, but also provides more clarity to buyers, sellers, and the residents of Santa Barbara. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, I was hoping Mr. Schulteis could address the second item in your letter that I was inquiring of Ms. Ostrander to.
Regarding the 10 to 5 days?
10 versus 5 days. The association was requesting a change to 5 days.
So buyer due diligence is generally 17 days in real estate transactions, and the first 7 days are the seller's opportunity to provide disclosures to a buyer pertaining to the property and their knowledge of the property. And so we like to get as much information to our clients as soon as possible so they can make informed decisions. And our fear is that if we wait 5 days, another 10 days, we're at day 15 of a due diligence period, which cuts it a little bit close. And we didn't know what kind of procedural things needed to occur to actually print a hard copy off from a street file, since we do that from our offices quite often. But I do understand that there's backlog and a lot of work to be done at the city.
So did you say 7 business days is really the seller's window?
That's the seller's window to prepare their seller disclosures to a buyer.
Okay.
And so as a part of this conversation, that would be a seller or a seller's agent's job to help get all disclosures pertaining to the property, including a street file, an electronic version, or a print version, to a buyer for them to review.
Okay. So I'm wondering what staff's comment would be if it got 10 got stricken and it went to 7 business days.
Okay.
Is that Commissioner Schwartz? Are you on the same wavelength on that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was actually going to then ask Mr. Schulteis, I know this is kind of spontaneous, if it would be acceptable, if 7 days would be acceptable as a compromise.
Yeah.
I think we are able to work with that if we actually look at how these things might unfold in future transactions. Okay. Sellers might be requesting hard copies well in advance of getting a listing, providing an electronic link that mirrors the printed version. For most buyers and sellers, should be a satisfactory method of disclosure. So, in reality, when this will actually occur, we can't really project, but I think that's appropriate.
Okay, I think we'd all like to move this forward to council, so I'm just looking, I'm looking for how we get to yes today. Thank you.
Ms. Reardon or Ms. Brooke, did you have something to?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Wiscombe. I can respond to that. In speaking with the record and archive supervisor today, it is very important that it remain 10 business days. For one, this is adding a substantial amount of work to staff with no funding source. So there is no ability to add staff to produce these records for the requester. And so they need to be able to fit this in with all of the other requests for records that they receive. She's already noticed an uptick in that since we have stopped producing the prior version of ZIRs. Also to that point, we've always encouraged agents to request these files before they actually enter into escrow on a property. So as soon as they get a listing, they can make this request for ZIR, and there may not be an escrow for several weeks where they're not under that disclosure deadline that he's referring to.
We can live with that. We can live with the 10 days.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can change our behavior to help protect our clients.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Great. Thank you very much for your comments. We still have, thank you, Ms. Brooke. We still have public comment open. Bob Hart is next. Thank you and welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks for letting me address you this afternoon. Sorry. I'm Bob Hart. I was the proponent on this initiative, and so I first off just want to be here in case you have any questions about how we got here and things. We did have signature gatherers getting signatures for us, and they were able to gather twice as many signatures as actually necessary to get on the ballot, and they told us it was the easiest signature gathering they've ever done in the city of Santa Barbara because everyone was in alignment. So it's something that it was very clear that the voters of Santa Barbara would like to see ZIRs removed. City Council was very much in agreement with that. We have worked very hard with the city staff, the city attorney, the city council to come up with some good compromise solutions. We're very happy that we're here today with what I think should be pretty much a no-brainer for you to say we're okay with this. That we've worked out most of those issues. There was something that was very concerning that just came up, though, about an affidavit that from the buyer and seller saying they've completed this. We were assured that there was going to be nothing of that sort, and that it was going to be a contractual agreement between buyer and seller. If the seller didn't provide it, they're in violation of their contract and their disclosure duties, and that would take care of it, and that the city wasn't going to check to make sure that every transaction had one or require any documentation from the buyer or seller to prove that. So it's very disconcerting to hear that at this 11th hour, that was never part of our discussions. So we've made our case to the city council about why. I don't think we need to go through about all the damage that was done to people in Santa Barbara, so we don't need that. But we're just here to say thank you. We want to make sure it's done. We've worked out the details, whether it's 10 days or 5 days. We can live with that. We can adjust. The main thing is that we don't keep damaging the citizens of Santa Barbara with inaccurate reports. As long as we've got that taken care of, we're going to be good on taking care of it the rest of the way.
Thank you, Mr. Hart, and thank you for pushing this forward after all these years. Yes, Commissioner Higgins has a question.
Mr. Hart,
I think.
Congratulations on getting here and your perseverance on this. So, at any time though, was there discussion about trailing and general plan amendment after this sort of compromise procedure?
There was some discussion, and the concern we had is that we have had the initial initiative qualified. We were ready to go forward. To do a general plan amendment was going to be pushing things down farther.
I meant do this now and then trail it later, so it is actually formally
We were
removed.
told that we couldn't do it now by the city attorney.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
We do this now, package in 2 or 3 or 5 years later when they're doing another general plan amendment or housing element. And
We deferred to the city attorney as to what's the best procedure on doing this, and we're fine with that procedure.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr.
Chair
Hart.
Chair Wiscombe, could I
Yes.
speak to the affidavit comment? I think that way I'll nip it in the bud. That was an internal discussion that staff and we had because from the way the original draft existed, it required someone to come in to the community development department or get a form off of our website and submit it. And that was what I think Ms. Reardon was referring to with regards to an affidavit. It would basically be saying, I'm requesting the record for this address either electronically, the website link, or in a paper copy, and pursuant to this section, and it would list the section that requires them to provide it to the buyer. So that was how we were trying to internally figure out how we would deal with that. So that's what she was referring to. The way it's currently drafted now, it just says that you can get the information by going on the web page and clicking on the link.
Thank you, Ms. Ostringer. Okay. Anna Marie Gott, you're next, and then you're going to be followed by Jarrett Gorin, who will be a final speaker. Welcome.
Good afternoon. You often cannot even read the documents at that link. So actually requiring that everything be done in advance upon listing would be much better, because then someone could actually look at the documents and find out if they're even legible. One of the recommendations that I actually have is to require that the county actually release documents to you based upon their tax rolls. All of that information could be actually put in the street file. That could then easily be packaged over to the new buyer. So they would know exactly what the county believes is on the property and what they tax it at. Then if there's any discrepancies, they can ask the buyer what's up. One thing that you don't understand about these particular files is that sometimes there is paperwork missing. People cannot understand them because they have no idea what they're looking at. I already said that they're illegible in many cases, but then there is no information regarding enforcement. You have no idea if there is an enforcement action taking place. And guess what I got today in my email? The building plans for a property in Carpinteria. Wow, from the actual Carpinteria building department. Because they don't consider those to be copyrighted because they're not. If you have to, put a watermark on something. It is ridiculous that we hide everything behind some crazy idea that everything is copyrighted or not disclosable. All of this is disclosable, everything. And the city of Santa Barbara doesn't want to do it. Finally, just release all the information. We often do not get it. Go down and look at what you can actually see before you make a decision. Because if you went down and looked at some of the things that I look at, you wouldn't understand what you were looking at if you were buying a house. Finally, really consider offering a report that a buyer could actually purchase from the city so that they could actually have some sort of certification that the property that they're buying doesn't have problems with it. Really think about that, because that would be an excellent way to protect buyers, and someone could get the ball rolling on that very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. I gave you a little extra time because, yeah. Okay. Jarrett Gorin, you'll be our final speaker. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning, land use consultant here in Santa Barbara. I'm really happy with the way this is going. I'm glad this is moving forward. I thought it would be helpful to just clarify, there's three primary sources of information that goes into a ZIR, and those are the street file, the planning file, and then archive plans. Okay, so a street file is basically the file that's got records of building permits that have been issued. These are usually like 8.5 by 11s with the text description of the scope. Sometimes they have a sketch on the back. The really old ones from the 20s have it on graph paper, that kind of thing. The planning file doesn't exist for every property. It exists on properties where there's been some sort of discretionary review, design review, planning commission hearings, that kind of thing is in there. The third file is the archive plans. And I've got to correct Ms. Gott. They are copyrighted. That's not speculation. It's a matter of law. The city can't just hand you out plans that are architect stamped or even by designers. They're copyrighted. So the city does make them available to you, but right now they can't do it in a timely manner. We regularly request these plans, and often it's 3 to 4 weeks before we can get them. And when people are hiring me to investigate this kind of thing for them, I really like to see those plans. And so I would urge you in any recommendation that you send forward to the council to add a provision that the plans be made available within the same time frame that we're talking about providing this ZIR. 10 business days would be fine. And the city does not need to give people copies of those. They simply need to make them available in the event somebody wants to come in and look at them. And lots of people don't need copies once they've looked at them. But working on behalf of my clients, I would like the opportunity to get those in a timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Okay, and let the record reflect, we received a letter from, or an email from Thomas Schulteis, the president of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. So that goes in as a written record in our record, and we're closing public comment, and it is back to the commission for discussion. Yes, Commissioner Higgins, you may start.
For Allison, maybe, just occurred to me a lot of the problems with the ZIR procedures stem from reliance on ZIRs that weren't done accurately at the time, or just conflicts, or things that were regulated, that are regulated now that weren't regulated then, scope creep from land use issues to building code issues. So, and you don't have to agree with me on that, but that's my view. Is there any what will happen to old ZIRs that are still in files?
I can answer that. Chair Whitcomb, Commissioner Higgins, they'll still remain in the file, and any violations noted on them are still violations. So they're not going to disappear with this. And whether they're minor violations, they'll stay, in the file. If they're major, they probably already have been referred for enforcement.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Lodge, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The ZIR under this plan would be as good as the street files are. And I know that I've looked up properties and, they don't seem to be complete. Is there any way that staff can be assured that everything will be in there? For example, our former old-fashioned ZRRs, if they've been done on a property, would that be in the street file?
Chair Whitcomb, Commissioner Lodge, any prior ZIR that was performed on a property is within the street file. And this won't change the completeness or non-completeness of the street or the planning files. That's what the information in there is the information in there. And another follow-up answer to Commissioner Schwartz's comment is if you find discrepancies between what you view in the street file online and what you view when you come into the city, you need to let the records supervisor know so that could be fixed. Because to our knowledge, everything that's in the street file is scanned and it should be obtainable online too, or vice versa.
And I have another question on this issue of whether plans are copyrighted or not. Anyone can take a screenshot from a video, and that is that illegal to do?
Yes.
Really? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to be really clear about this reference to an affidavit, Ms. Ostranger. So I noted that you said this was an internal discussion. So we should just kind of strike it from the record. It doesn't apply. It's not going to be included. Is that correct?
Right. Well, if an applicant comes to the counter to request a paper file, we're going to have them fill something out so we know how they want it. Either if they want the hard copy or they want us to provide it electronically, they're going to need to put their address in, the buyers need to put their names in, and then it's going to reference the code sections. So
that's what you're referring to.
Yeah,
so
and it might say I'm requesting this pursuant to this code section so that I can provide it to, excuse me, so the seller comes in. I mix that up. am getting this as the seller so that I may provide it to the buyer pursuant to this.
Okay. So just a requesting documentation, if I sort of think of a generic term. So some requesting documentation will be on file, whatever we call it.
Right, and when we had originally drafted the original drafting version of this, we were calling it an affidavit because it was everyone basically had to get the form in order for us to provide the information or the web link. So we've taken that, we've made it easier, and so we won't necessarily have a form, so there wouldn't be any way for us to know to get an affidavit or know.
Well, I guess not being an attorney myself, that has other legal connotations and implications to use the term affidavit, doesn't it? And so I would just, I don't know if you want to.
And that was my general term when I was talking to staff. That's not staff making that up.
Okay. My other question goes back to a comment I heard from Mr. Gorin. It was one of my questions when I did not see archives referenced along with street and planning files to be provided. So does staff have any kind of response to a recommendation of 10 business days, as Mr. Gorin has put forward, for viewing of the archived plans? I certainly personally know how valuable they are in these sorts of transactions.
Madam
and
Chair
others.
and Commissioner Schwartz, I agree. They are critical information in this type of transaction.
I can't commit to that on behalf of the records staff. I do know that the reason it takes so long is because the number of records requests is extremely high right now. And so they fit it in as best they can. So if that were your recommendation forward to City Council, we would need to consult with the records supervisor and see what other changes would need to be made and their priority of workload items to accommodate that.
And for clarity, we've specifically excluded plans from the definition of the zoning information report. So that's really a separate issue where we would obviously encourage a buyer, I'm using that term, to come in and look at the plans, but that's not what we've defined as a zoning information report. That would be the buyer's obligation and due diligence to go in and request those archive plans.
I noticed that was missing, which is why I'm bringing it up. And my experience, as Mr. Gorin referenced, it's the same, is that it can take 2 to 3 weeks to actually obtain and view archived plans. And so it doesn't fit anywhere within a typical real estate transaction period, which is why I'm trying to see if there's some other method and compromise that could be achieved here. Because I think we're all intending, or we all are desiring for a buyer to see as much information that's in all of these files that's available to anybody else under other circumstances. So, okay, I'll set that aside to perhaps come back to. Maybe staff could help me. I want to try to connect on page 2 of our staff report. The last paragraph under discussion, it says that the city will provide the ZIR within 10 business days of that request, page 2 of our staff report. So this is page 28 of 130 in our packet. Could staff help me locate sort of the companion language for the city providing the ZIR within 10 business days in the actual ordinance? Could you help me understand where that is?
Yes, Chair. Commissioner Swartz, it's the proposed amendment that we passed out today. It's that same language. It talks, so it's on page, 68 of yours, and...
so this is the new kind of redlined version that you have?
Yeah, you see
so
where the big yellow paragraph, the last sentence, the Community Development Department will provide the zoning information report within 10 business days from receipt of that request.
In both cases, it's right under obtaining a zoning information report.
Thank you. Very good. That was a question I had. Now, I want to come back to a question I posed, and it's this issue of possible discrepancies. There have been discrepancies between online documents and the physical street and planning file documents. I don't know if I just ask staff to please take that back and look at how to improve that. But I think it's particularly important with this new ordinance and a new process that we're saying we're basically both to the sellers and buyers, you can get the same information doing it this way, which is paper copy, versus having a web link or providing it on a thumb drive, whatever it is, an electronic. If there is not the identical set of information, there's already a built-in flaw to the process that we're proposing being used. Today I don't know how to resolve that, but to me, unless we resolve it, these are not identically comparable processes in terms of deliverables to a buyer, seller and buyer, but primarily the buyer, prospective buyer. Ms. Brooke, were you going to comment, if you would?
Sure. Madam Chair and Commissioner Schwartz, so you're correct. I've experienced what you have as well, whereas maybe the scanned version is the paper color is green or it's something and it just isn't very legible when you view it online, or there might have been a Post-it note on a piece of paper and that got scanned through and it's blocking some of the text underneath. And this change in the ZIR program is not going to change that quality control difference, but we've made every best human effort to make those scanned images match what's in our paper file. And the ordinance as drafted does I mean, the main premise of the ordinance is that we would hand over the hard copy file, which is the physical file, within 10 business days. If they want the added convenience of an electronic link to what's scanned as PDFs, then we can do that much sooner. But there may be discrepancies in that, and this will not change that.
And Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Schwartz, I've advised the record staff that if someone wants a hard copy, they go to the same web link that anyone would get, and that's how they produce the records, the same way someone would produce it. So if a seller were to get the link and see that there was some discrepancy, or as Ms. Brooks said, it's illegible, and they provide it to the buyer, and the buyer has some issues with it, they can come down and actually request to look at the physical paper file and go through it. And we do provide those generally like right there. It's like a library card. You fill it out and she'll hand it over to them. And so they can go through it. And in some ways that's the better way to view it, because some of the records are quite old. We have very extensive street file records.
And you can take a screenshot of something if you're looking for something in particular that didn't scan quite well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, as I start to go through, and I know we're not looking at the Exhibit C, the resolution, but between that resolution and the ordinance, there are varying ways to refer to what I think are the same things. So in some areas it says physical copy, other areas it says copy. On some pages, it refers to exercise of human judgment, others expression of opinion by city staff. And I don't want to spend the time today going through this, but I would strongly recommend that staff go through this. So if you're talking about a paper copy, let's use on every page in every instant that term, paper copy. Even on page 69 of 130 in number 2, in the same sentence, in this one sentence after another, first it says paper copy, then it says physical copy. So I would ask that just so there's absolute clarity in what we're referring to and what's available and what's required. Now, on this same page, 69 of 130 in our packet, just to confirm, is the web link a hyperlink? Is that all we're referring to, a hyperlink to the street and planning file information? So this is in number 2. The request, let me just read this to you. So the request must identify the residential property and state whether the report is requested as a paper copy, an electronic copy, or as a web link.
Chair Winscombe, Commissioner Schwartz, what it would be is a link to our property database webpage where you fill in the address of the property, and then it'll pull up the information.
And an electronic copy, so how would the recipient obtain that?
The electronic copy, they would need to come in and request that, and that would be in a digital form, and it would be actually the actual street file of that.
So like on a thumb drive, something like that?
It depends on how big it is, or a file share, or it just depends on how much information's in there.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it on that page. I think I have one more question here. Excuse me while I go to... so page 80 of 130 in our packet, and this is page 14 of the ordinance. I think I'm just reinforcing my other question. So down under number 5, this is in definitions. Zoning information report means the records contained in the street and zoning files. Well, aren't we saying street and planning files? So again,
yes. Chair Whipston, Commissioner Schwartz, yes, we've caught that. There's 2 instances when it was referred to a zoning file, and it is actually the planning file.
Okay,
so we've
street and planning files,
for the
residential property, excluding building plans. So here is where I want to call out and ask my colleagues to also share their thoughts about this exclusion of building plans and whether or not we might want to consider a 10-day, I don't know if it'd be view-only, read-only access. Yeah, that because of the legal aspects in obtaining copies. And I think those are my questions for now. Thank you. We're going to get to comments later, Madam Chair.
I think we're into comments.
Oh, okay.
I really feel we need to move this along. Thank you.
I'll move it along, and I'll give comments right now if you'd like me to. So in 2014, Commissioner Campanella, myself, and former Commissioner June Peugeot were on a task force or a working group with staff, City Attorney's Office, and the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. So upwards of 9 months on a regular meeting basis, we went through all aspects of the process, the ordinance, what I'll call the customer experience, which are those who had been experiencing issues with our process and our ordinance. And though I'm very pleased that we are here today moving this forward in such a fashion that can garner support from the council, too many years, in my opinion, have gone by where I think our working group, unfortunately, could have helped resolve, not that for lack of trying, not for lack of diligence and intention. It's just unfortunate it's taken these number of years. But nonetheless, am pleased to be able to move this forward, and I'm hoping that the council resolves the matter and that there's improvement all around. And to staff, I'm hoping that in freeing up the human resource allocation associated with these inspections, that perhaps we can better utilize our inspectors in other ways that are of greater value to the city and to the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. I don't see any other lights on. My only comment is I listened hard to Ms. Brooks' comment about having to talk to staff about records for getting building plans. And I really think that the intent of this proposed ordinance, and we're making a recommendation to City Council, is to really eliminate the human error portion of the ZIR that has been such a problem and has caused really some pretty tragic stories here in our community. So I really feel that this is a really good start, and I wouldn't be willing to go out on a limb and recommend that we add something about a limit on how long it takes to get a building plan or an archive file. I think you said 3 to 4 days, didn't you, for 3 to 4 weeks? 10. Okay. Yeah. So at any rate, I guess I'm happy with the ordinance, the proposed ordinance as it's written, with the changes that we got today, and with Commissioner Schwartz's comments about cleaning up the language. I think we should make sure that before it goes back to council that gets done. Things like paper copy versus physical copy. Just those kinds of things, just for consistency in the ordinance. But other than that, I'm fully supportive of it. And since I've been talking, we have 2 more lights that have come on. So Commissioner Thompson.
Well, I support sending this forward as long as the realtors and the public is in support of it. I personally would rather see us eliminate the whole thing entirely, even if it took a GPA to do it. But we hear that it's doable, workable, and we can move it forward more quickly, so I'm willing to support sending it forward to the council. I would make an observation to staff talking about the lack of budget and resources to do some of these lookups. I would point out that this revised ZIR process frees up inspectors that used to have to go to property and then write up reports. So maybe the budget squeeze isn't as tight as was proposed.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Higgins.
Thank you. I totally want to congratulate the realtors for going out and bringing a gun to a knife fight finally. I mean, no disrespect to the intent of this and the public disclosure, and I totally appreciate, Ariel's entry point onto this, but, and staff has been having to struggle with this, doing something impossible, this impossible construct of having to go to a property and close your eyes on some things and keep them open on others. And the original intent of this was to go and look and see if somebody was living in a garage, and it just grew from there. And I kind of would love to see this thing finally get squashed altogether and removed out of our codes with the general plan amendment trailer. But it is what it is. It's here now, and it's much better than it has been. So, but even in this proceedings, we see there's still some complications. And I think, as long as it's there, it's still going to grow. There's still going to be problems with it. And if we're effectively neutering the thing, then let's just kill it. But I would support some sort of time frame. If you want to add that to a motion of 10 days to get plans viewed, because that's part of, I think, the public disclosure aspect that our city attorney was giving some background on, which I support. So that procedure is broken. As a customer of that myself, I find it very challenging, and depends on who you ask, kind of thing too. So that's problematic.
Ms. Ostringer.
Chair Wiscombe, to Commissioner Higgins' point, I just want to point out that as the ordinance is drafted, the plans are excluded from a zoning information report, so I'd have to redraft the ordinance in order to somehow, because it's not part of the report, because we can't provide it electronically via web link. So I can get creative, but I would have to redraft the ordinance to try and get creative that way.
It goes to ordinance committee? This item then goes to ordinance committee and then the council, right?
Right. So
I don't want to add more work to your plate, but I mean, maybe separately, the department can improve that procedure by which plans are made available to customers for ZIRs or other. That's maybe a separate item. I'm not sure.
That's kind of it. I think it might be a separate item. Thank you.
Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you. I put it on because I was going to suggest the same thing, that we not complicate this ZIR process by coming up with things on plans that need more interpretation or make things more complicated. We're trying to make it simpler. So if we want to handle that as a suggestion or a separate encouragement, that's fine, but I'd keep it out of this ordinance. Thank you.
We could actually make a separate recommendation to the ordinance committee to perhaps address that at some point in time, not put forward this as it is. That would be my preference. So I don't see any other lights on, so I'd be willing to entertain a motion.
And
Yes.
also with regards, I gave you the sheet with the proposed changes that you received today.
Yes.
Also, I had, what is not on that sheet is my suggested change in the language in 2887.220B4, where it defines zoning information report, to make it a more general, excluding plans as opposed to the more specific. And then that's also found at 30.285.020, number 5.
And there was 2887, 220.
B4.
B as in boy, 4?
Yes.
Okay. And, okay. And it's strike out the references to building plans.
Strike out the specific references and just leave it as plans.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
I
Commissioner
think we
Schwartz.
also want to reference what Commissioner Campanella pointed out, which is on page 4 of the ordinance, the missing item, letter E. So we need that back in.
Right.
Ms. Ostringer is
Yes.
going to make sure that whatever that is, we don't have it in front of us. So.
Yes,
Right,
Madam
okay.
Chair. And to that point, this was probably the fastest ordinance that's been drafted. So we'll go through it with a fine-tooth comb now that we have these changes and make sure that we address your consistency concerns.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is consistencies in language, such as paper copy and physical copy. The missing section E, the strikeout changes to 2787 220B4 and 30-285-0205. And what else do we have here? Didn't we have? Oh, and obviously the yellow highlighted changes that we received today, September 5th, 2019, for item 3A from staff. So with that, I would entertain a motion.
I move to forward this draft ordinance to the City Council with the changes you just listed, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, so motion by Commissioner Lodge, second by Commissioner Schwartz. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you all very much, and thank you, staff, and thank you to Board of Realtors for working so hard. I know it's been a long road. I like Commissioner Higgins' comment. What was it? Bringing a gun to a knife fight? Is that what it was? Yeah. So you've been brave and you've been patient. Thank you. Okay. Does anyone need a break? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break and let people get set up for item number 3B. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. I am calling back to order the regular Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, September 5th, 2019. And we are on item 3B, which is application of Edward DeVicente, architect, for Hannah Beachside LLC, property owner at 11 Anacapa Street in the OC/SD3 zone, local coastal program, land use designation, ocean-oriented commercial. The project consists of renovation and adaptive reuse of an existing 11,201 net square foot multi-tenant commercial building. And we have 2 discretionary applications that are required for this project. And number 1 is a modification to provide fewer than the required number of parking spaces. And 2, a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone. And we will have a staff report, and then we will hear from the applicant. You will have 20 minutes for the applicant team, and then we'll open it for public comment. If the commissioners have any questions after the staff report or the applicant team report, they can ask any pressing questions, and then we'll open it for public comment, and then it will be back to the commission for any additional cleanup questions and a discussion. So thank you. Mr. Bowman, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Chair Wiscombe. Good afternoon, commissioners. This is a request for a coastal development permit and a parking modification at 11 Anacapa Street. And the purpose of the hearing is to consider the project. It's a proposal for a renovation and change of uses of the existing warehouse industrial type building, and also a proposal for parking for the proposed new uses on the property. This is an aerial view of the site. It's a few years old. The building itself is indicated where it says the word site, and the property's outlined with the yellow dashed line. And it's bounded by Helena Avenue and Anacapa Street. And there's an intervening restaurant building facing or fronting on East Cabrillo Boulevard, and you'll hear some reference to that with the parking lot between the subject building and that restaurant property, and there's some sharing of parking in that parking lot. The property is in OC, Ocean-Oriented Commercial Zone, and in the coastal zone, and the city's coastal zone is divided east-west into component areas, and this site is in the Lower State Street coastal component area. I've broken out the project description into the building and the site just to make it fit on these slides. So it's a proposed renovation of this old multi-tenant, non-residential building. It was originally, I think, from the 1940s as a warehouse or industrial ocean-oriented type building. It kind of comes from another era when land uses and needs of the community were different. So the project is trying to kind of update the building and improve it for today's needs. Included in the proposal is to permit 2,100 square feet of interior existing space to retail uses. There are not any existing retail spaces, but this project would convert some, or this much floor area to retail. And then convert about a quarter of the building on the northeast side to a new restaurant and what was a workshop type space. The project also largely kind of cleans up the property, I guess you could say. It would demolish unpermitted a second floor addition on the roof, and there's some mezzanine floor area inside because it's a rather tall building. So it would clean up all the unpermitted improvements that have been put there over the years, and also make accessibility improvements. The floor of the building is higher than the site grade, so we'll describe how accessibility is achieved for the new project. This is a floor plan. The blue outline is the building footprint or building exterior outline. The yellow area that I've shaded is that conversion to the new restaurant, and then outside the restaurant on the north side and the east side is a proposed new exterior deck with restaurant seating. And then the green areas indicate the proposed retail floor area and those three small retail spaces. It's kind of interesting for a freestanding building it went to design review through the ABR, but what's kind of unusual is it's proposed to be altered on two elevations, and the other two elevations are proposed to be left as is. So this shows the proposed east elevation. This faces the subject's parking lot in Anacapa Street, showing the new beer garden restaurant. And you can see a deck there that those figures are standing on. That provides accessibility. Over at the far right of this image, it's hard to tell what it is, but there's a ramp along there that would ramp up from Anacapa Street up to that deck level to get you up to the floor level of the building. Then the other elevation proposed to be changed is the north elevation. That's just the corner of the same proposed beer garden restaurant. In this image, kind of in that black silhouette, you can see that deck level and then how it slopes down to the right, which is the Helena Street side. So the site improvements include accessibility and the new 1,698 square foot exterior deck for the restaurant. Also reconfiguring the parking lot to provide the needed parking, and also extensive landscape improvements with a lot of additional landscaping. There are some existing island planters with trees there now. It's been to the ABR a few times, and they look carefully at the landscaping. To accommodate the parking, they'd like to get rid of those planters interior to the parking lot and compensate, or more than compensate, for that landscaped area by getting more perimeter planters, with the thinking that the benefit to the aesthetics of the property from the neighboring sites and from the public view would be improved to provide the landscaping at the perimeter to screen the parking lot. The project includes a new transformer that was going to be on a ground-mounted site feature in the landscaped area, but it's now proposed to be on a new utility pole in the Anacapa Street right-of-way. There's a new trash enclosure proposed at the northeast side of the site that's shown on the plans in the planter area, and it's screened. The trash enclosure itself is a screen, plus it has landscaping around it. And the valet parking configuration of the site is part of the proposal. This is just a rendering view. It's just a simplified drawing. It's a little bit easier to see. That yellow area is the proposed restaurant corner of the building, and kind of the pinkish color would be the new deck area for the restaurant. This shows some of the perimeter planter landscaping, and kind of the gray area in the middle of the parking lot. That's the drive aisle that enters from Anacapa Street, and the reason that's indicated with a different color is it's proposed to be new permeable paving. So the project proposes to provide the parking for the uses that it's changing to. In other words, they don't have any existing non-conforming parking that they're trying to hold on to. It's all based on the new parking requirement. They're requesting a parking modification and meeting the parking demand. So the project includes all the unpermitted changes of use and provides parking to meet the demand for the restaurant, seating inside and outside. The parking requirement is not met, and they're requesting a parking modification. And with the modification, they're also requesting valet parking to meet the demand. And that was based on the demand of shared uses, meaning different uses like, for example, a workshop space might have more activity in the morning or during the day versus a restaurant operating more at night, how those uses could be sympathetic to each other and share parking spaces. This is the parking data. So based on the proposal and all the proposed uses, the zoning ordinance parking requirement is 46 spaces. Based on the parking demand study, well, I should back up a step, I guess. For staff support of approving a parking modification, the proposal has to meet the actual parking demand. And generally, if a project shows us that they can meet the demand for parking, we support and recommend approval of a parking modification. So the parking demand for these shared uses and the way they interact in different hours and days, et cetera, is 31 spaces. The proposal includes 17 striped spaces that would be used like early morning when the restaurant's not operating. If people could just come in and self-park in the 17 striped spaces. And then the parking lot accommodates tandem parking in unstriped spaces of 32 cars, 32 parking spaces. And I've got a slide in a second that shows what that looks like. So this slide is about the parking modification. This is all these bullet points really demonstrate the applicant's proposal and their requested parking modification and how they propose to meet the parking demand. So it's all based on a shared parking demand study that's attached to the staff report. And that parking demand study refers to a city funk zone study that showed that the city conducted a funk zone study of people that were visiting the funk zone, and it was an intercept study where they questioned people that they encountered in the funk zone, and 35% of those respondents to the study indicated that they arrived via alternate modes of transportation other than just driving a car and parking it there. So this parking demand study took that into account and indicates a reduction of 35% reduction for the restaurant parking demand based on that funk zone study. And the proposal includes valet parking during restaurant hours, in other words, to meet the to meet the demand, they have to stack cars in with a valet operation. And that would be in operation during restaurant hours. That's not correct where it says 5 p.m. It's just whatever the restaurant hours, the valet parking would be operational. And then 3 stripe spaces are available. Even during valet operations, there are 3 stripe spaces on the adjacent parking area where people can self-park. I think I already said the modification is based on the parking demand. This shows what those look like in the parking lot. The blue spaces are those spaces that someone could self-park when the valet is not operational. And down at the lower left of the screen shows the 3 spaces that are dedicated for this 11 Anacapa Street property where people could self-park even during valet operational times. And then the red spaces are where the valet people would park cars behind the other cars and maneuver, shuffle cars around to get people in and out with the valet. While I'm here, because this is a good slide to show it, regarding the accessibility improvements. On this site plan, you can see like a heavy dashed gray line along the top of the site. Like in the upper right corner, that's where the ramp comes up from the Anacapa Street sidewalk up along that north side of the property up to the deck level. And then there's additional heavy gray dashed lines that enter the building at the doors from the deck level. So you come up to that deck and then you can enter the door at the door threshold level to get inside the floor level of the building. And then similarly coming off at the upper left of the picture, coming up from Helena Street, that would ramp up to that same deck and enter the space, for example, up there at 20 Helena Street, that space at the northwest corner. So the required finding for a parking modification, this is just a quote out of the ordinance, that it will not be inconsistent with the purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance. And the second clause is kind of the focus of it. Granting approval of a parking modification will not cause an increase in the demand for parking space or loading space in the immediate area. That's basically saying all the parking demand will be met on the project site. And then in our staff report, we discussed the coastal development permit. This is just summarizing the relevant Coastal Act policies and city local coastal plan policies that are relevant to the project. There are many coastal policies that are not applicable. It's not a habitat area, or there's not really a visual issue. In fact, that upper story that's on top of the building's being demolished, so it's kind of less of a visual impact or view issue with that being removed. The relevant policies come down to really public access. The Coastal Commission's very concerned about public access, so by meeting their parking demand on the site, they're not impinging on public access for people to come down and park on the streets to access the waterfront or the coast. The building has a couple of tenant spaces remaining that are vacant currently, but they're recognized as storage spaces that are non-conforming uses. But this proposed project doesn't constitute a substantial redevelopment of the building. So it's not really applicable because it's not a problem with non-conforming uses or non-conforming development, because the project's not conforming or proposing a substantial redevelopment anyway. And then the policy regarding off-street parking. So the proposal would meet its parking demand with off-street parking on site. The environmental review, there again, it was not really any issue. There was not any potentially significant project-specific impacts that needed to be addressed through existing development standards. So staff's analysis found that it qualifies for a 15183 CEQA exemption. So staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission consider the required findings as discussed in the staff report and approve the coastal development permit and the parking modification with the conditions of approval that are attached to the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Appreciate it. Okay. I think we'll move on to the applicant's presentation, and then we'll go to questions. So, Mr. Gorin, you're going to speak first, are you? Welcome. You have the team has 20 minutes to give your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning, and I am here representing Hannah Beach, LLC. Also going to speak for Ed DeVicente and DMHA. They are listed as the applicant on this. So I think Mr. Baumann covered everything really well. I'm going to cover at least two of the same topics, but sort of more graphically and with a couple of additional statistics, so you won't be hearing everything twice. So let's start with parking. That's probably the most critical thing on this project. And the bullet point on this is that this project is basically, it's a new package of uses for this building, which conforms to requirements and required uses in the coastal zone, and parking to match those uses. So scrap everything that's in there now, figure out what's going to be there, and then park it appropriately. That's what we're doing with this project. So here's a site plan, and these are the parking areas that are available to this project. There's questions about, other parking on the site, like, oh, there's these 22 spaces here. These 22 spaces are encumbered by this property right here, the restaurant. Okay, so we're not relying on those spaces for our parking in any way. I think, one of the people that sent a letter in sort of alluded to, we wouldn't be able to do this project if we didn't have this combination of parking agreements. And the irony of that is that that parking agreement benefits the other property, not this property. We've subtracted all that out, and we're dealing purely with what's left on our property, which is the areas that are highlighted there in purple. So what I'm going to do is, let's go through this really quick. This is a condition of approval that's in your package. And it's not part of our proposal that the valet operations occur when the restaurant's open. That's a condition of approval on this project. So restaurant open, valet operations in effect. And if it's closed, then there don't have to be valet operations. And the way this looks is like this. So this is the parking that's always available, whether or not there's valet operations. So we've got the 3 spaces down here that are self-parked. And by the way, those are on our property. I think staff said they're on the adjacent property. I think what they mean is they're in the adjacent lot. But this entire lot here, this is the property line between this property and the property on Cabrillo. So this whole parking lot pretty much is on our property. But like I said, 22 of those spaces are encumbered by the adjacent property. So we have these 3 spaces always available. And then if there's no valet present, these spaces here in green and up here are all available for self-parking. So this is the parking demand study that Associated Transportation's engineer did. And this is probably the only thing you have to read in the study. But this is the table that shows peak parking demand. And what I've highlighted here is this is what's happening when the restaurant's closed. Okay, so the restaurant parking demand, we're going to take that out because they're closed with the numbers that I'm talking about in terms of self-parking. So what we've got is 8 spaces on peak daytime demand for weekdays, and then only 6 on the weekend, and that's mainly a function of like the workshop uses and stuff not being open on the weekend days. So what this ends up doing is we have a weekday peak parking demand of 8 and a peak parking demand on the weekend of 6. And what we've got is 17 available. So much more available than any of the projected peak parking demands when the restaurant is closed. So the next thing we have to look at is what happens when the restaurant's open. That's the biggest generator on the site. So when that happens, valet operations are in effect, and this whole thing here becomes a valet lot because they're tandem parking spaces, and that's the only way that can work. So we'll go back to this table, and here I am counting the restaurant demand because the restaurant's open. So in this case, we've got a 31 demand on a weekday, and then it's lower on the weekend, again, because there's other uses other than the restaurant that aren't necessarily generating demand on a weekend. So what that ends up looking like is 31 on the weekdays and 28 on the weekends, and we have 32 spaces. So we provide one more space than the projected peak parking demand, and that is how your commission can make the finding that the parking demand is met on the site, is the highest possible demand is not, it's generating less demand than the spaces that are provided. So the next issue that's come up because of public comments, and I want to address that, is accessibility. And I guess the summary here is this project is a vast improvement in accessibility for this site. Basically, the current building has no accessibility at all, nothing. You can't even so much as get into the door to most of these spaces if you're disabled. So here's the site plan again, and let's start by looking at these are the accessible parking spaces. And there's some questions about, oh, well, they can't be valet spaces. Well, they aren't really valet spaces. If somebody needs to park in one of these spaces during valet operations and they don't want to leave their keys with the valet moves this car out of the way and they park in the space and keep their keys. And it seems pretty simple, but some of the opponents of the project seem confused about that. So I hope that clears that up. From those spaces, Tony went over this, but I've highlighted it in yellow. It makes it a little easier to see. These are our paths of travel, and you've got a path of travel from these spaces into every single space on the site. This deck provides a lot of access, obviously provides it to the whole restaurant, but then you come across the deck and you get right in here to this space. You come over here and you can get indoors to every single space in this property. And then aside from that, we've also got an additional path of travel from the sidewalk up into the building. So it vastly improves the accessibility of this property and of that building. So let me go back one. What about the Helena side? Why don't we have accessible paths on the Helena side? And the problem with that is the grade difference on the Helena side. We got a significant grade difference, and we don't have any sort of additional area to put ramps. The street goes right up to the building. There's not enough right-of-way to do that. And so there isn't I think it's the terminology is readily achievable way to provide access. And I got that term from this report. This is the CASP report. This is a certified professional whose job it is to be an expert on ADA and California accessibility requirements and evaluate projects to make sure they comply with them. And they evaluated this project and deemed that it complies. And they're even relied on by the building department. The building department of the city basically says if you've got a CASP that has reviewed this, we're going to rely on their review to determine your compliance. So we had that done and everything complies. One other thing here that I'm going to show a slide in response to a question that one of your commission had on our site visit on Tuesday is this project also, it provides sort of a community benefit in terms of accessibility. So here's an aerial of the surrounding neighborhood, and then what we have over here is the Garden Street parking lot, which is one of the park and walk places that people use when they go to the Funk Zone. And recently, on the other side of Anacapa Street from us, in Kim Hughes's property, they've developed an accessible path of travel all the way from that lot through their property to Anacapa Street. So that's what I have highlighted there. And then our project is going to provide an additional accessible link between Anacapa Street and Helena Street. So you end up with sort of a mid-block link. I realize there's no connection right across the street there, but there's nothing now. So I think this is a big improvement, and that benefits non-disabled people as well as disabled people. So that's a benefit that the project provides to the community beyond just the project itself. So I think that's everything I want to cover. I see I've got 10 minutes left here, and I would like to reserve that time to respond to any public comments if that's appropriate.
That works fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And if I forget about your 10 minutes, I know you're going to remind me, so. Okay, we have a lot of public comment, so we'll go to commissioner questions first. Commissioner Campanella?
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Gorin? All right, leaving that slide up, so the area in yellow that's closest to the ocean, that's also going to be handicap accessible, did you say?
Are you
right? No,
Chair Wiscombe?
The chair, if you will.
This whole thing right here.
Yep.
The upside down chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is all accessible. So this is our path of travel between Anacapa and Helena, which is sort of the straight through, which, these are our parking spaces here. This comes down to the sidewalk to provide access from there and goes straight through. And then we also have the secondary path of access that comes from the sidewalk up into this area. And I think I've got a slide that shows that a little bit better. That.
Okay.
So what you're seeing, the chair you're seeing, this is the front leg of the chair, that's
right.
The seat, and then this is the back.
So the front leg of the chair is access, but not accessible. It's not handicap accessible.
No, Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campbell, that is accessible.
It is?
Yes.
Handicap, okay. So what if I have this right, considering that you're tandem parking during peak hours, you're providing several pathways for people to get around whatever's happening in that parking lot, backing up, turning around, and things like that. There's different ways for people to get to the deck rather than having to walk through the parking lot.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, that's correct. The no pedestrian or accessible access goes through the parking lot at all. It's completely around the perimeter.
Okay. And then you mentioned, if I have this right, the two handicap spaces. There's, I think, this lets me know why I was off one unit in the one parking space in the tandem, but there are actually 3 tandem spaces that go across those 2 handicap spaces. Correct. So 2 cars would have to be relocated when somebody was coming out.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, not exactly. This whole center section here is the required ADA loading zone. Okay. So a car would pull straight through into this space. This car wouldn't actually have to be moved in order for somebody to get into this space. So to get here, the valets would move that car right there, and to get in here, they'd move this car right here, and this car could stay right where it is because it's only blocking the loading space.
Okay. On the 3 spaces that are near Helena, the 3 spaces that are in the other parking lot?
These ones?
Yeah. Are they going to be marked so they're not being used either by the public or the neighboring restaurant for the use of your...
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, yes, they will be designated visually with paint or signage or something to make sure that those are reserved for the 11 Anacapa property.
Now, anyone who's going to the restaurant can use it, or they're going to be reserved for your valet parking during valet parking hours?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, we're not reserving those for the valet. It's possible the valet might use one of those, but we're just counting those spaces in our entire group of spaces, and that meets our parking demand there. So somebody going to the restaurant or any of the stores might park there. the valets might stick a car there and somebody else parks in the valet lot. Just to be clear, the valet is not specific to the restaurant. The valet is for the property.
Property, including?
Anything on the property.
Any of the hours, okay. Now, I'm trying to understand the condition if you're at any time during the operation of the valet facility, you're unable to satisfy the parking demand on-site, and queuing, loading, and storing of vehicles in the right-of-way occurs, the operation shall be temporarily closed. I'm trying to figure out what triggers it, or how do you satisfy it, closing an operation when you have a parking lot full of tandem parked cars?
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner Campanella, I think I'm going to defer that mostly to staff, but I never defer anything 100% to them. I think this is really an enforcement issue. I think that the condition you're looking at is enforcement teeth. If it turns out that these guys or some operator there is regularly using the street, for example, to stage valet operations, which this is designed that they don't have to do that, but if they're over programming the lot and they are doing that and there are complaints, rather than have to open an enforcement case from scratch, the city can open a case and say you're out of compliance with your project conditions. So that would be that's how I think that condition would mostly operate. I don't know how it would operate in real time, like all of a sudden.
It would be obvious and repetitive, I would guess.
Yeah, like in this particular 15 minutes, all of a sudden we have to close the restaurant. I don't think it's intended. I don't think they mean it to mean that, and I don't expect that would ever happen. I think what would happen is if this project is not meeting its demand, which is the finding you're making that it's going to do, that they have a serious problem and have to reevaluate that use, and the city's got enforcement teeth.
So last question. Based on your parking demand study, the parking required for the restaurant and deck, that pretty well fixes what the uses on the remaining properties can be in the future. Because right now they're low parking requirement even below the restaurant and deck. So if someday you wanted to expand the restaurant or some other use that required higher parking, that would be another application that would have to come in order to try to accomplish that.
Yeah, Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, that's correct. So the package of uses in the building must align with the parking that's provided. So if the restaurant goes out of business and closes and they open up 2 tenants in there that generate less traffic than a restaurant and still meets it, they could do that. If they want to expand the restaurant, they have to take away something that generates demand elsewhere in the building. Think of it like a water balloon. If you squeeze it somewhere else has to expand, and that's how this whole thing works.
And could you explain what we discussed on the site visit relative to, I know you have accessible path of travel, but what else is being done to the entire building as well as the other uses at the same time that you're creating this restaurant structurally?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, I don't have the full detailed list of everything. I forget even how many pages that report is, but it goes into basically the way ADA things work is there's a priority list of improvements, and you go through and you see what's present in the building now, and in this case that's nothing, basically. And then there's a first group of improvements that you start to do those first. If they're present, you don't have to do it. If they're not present, that's the first thing they want you to start doing as far as ADA goes. And on a project like this, I think this is way beyond the hardship level of sometimes you can get out of doing things if your project value is below a certain amount. I think it's $160,000. This project is into full compliance. So any ADA upgrades that are required, that are readily achievable, have to be done as part of the project. But I can't answer it as to the entire list of specific improvements.
And then let's say any structural changes being made as well at the same time?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, there are some larger identified structural improvements that are going to be made as part of this project, and then there are future non-critical ones which have been identified that as tenants switch out and vacate, those will be carried out as part of any tenant improvements to, a tenant change out. And that's so that we don't have to disrupt tenants that are in there and disrupt their operations for things like that. But the major improvements are part of this project.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. Thank you, Mr. Gorin. Okay, I think we're going to move on to, I don't see any more lights on. We have a lot of speakers for public comment. You each get 2 minutes, and I will say that if you're here to support the prior speaker who just spoke, you can just say that and then leave. But when you come up to the mic, there's a timer there, so you'll see how much time you have left on your 2 minutes. And if you just give us your name when you come up, that would be really helpful. And I'm going to go 2 at a time here. So our first speaker is Anna Marie Gott, and she'll be followed by John Tyne.
Good afternoon. I hope you've got my letter. I sent it by email, and I also printed it out for you. There was a historical agreement for parking. That was canceled in 2015. But somehow they're trying to put the genie back in the bottle and say that 29 East Cabrillo, is basically using 11 Anacapa's parking, and it's all good. It's not really the case. They canceled it in 2015. I provided you with a new covenant dated 2018. If they'd done it the same day, hey, there would be no problem. They did it years later. This is not a non-conforming historical use for a parking. It's just blatantly false. And let's just, call this what this is. This is a project that does not have enough parking. This is a project that is trying to use the Funk Zone study to reduce its parking. People will not want to pay for valet parking. We know that. We know that from the Funk Zone study. We found that people not only don't want to pay for just parking, $1.50 or $2 for metered parking, they don't want to pay for a valet that's going to be 10, 15, 20, or God only knows how much more. They will drive around the Funk Zone looking for parking, queuing in the middle of the street, and causing traffic problems. This project does not have a commercial loading zone. And have you walked the property or in that area? Do you even know where the commercial loading zone is in that area? Because you really can't find that in the Funk Zone. Please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. John Tyne, welcome. You'll be followed by, Naren Porter Kayasba? Is that, did I get that? Okay, I apologize. When you come up, you can correct me, please. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Tyne.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Coastal Commission. I'm here to speak in support of the project. I will say that there were some inaccuracies in Ms. Scott's recitation just now. I will also cite some inaccuracies in some of the written material that you received, both from Ms. Scott and from a gentleman named Will, who was claiming that there is a concert of ownership between 29 East Cabrillo and 11 Anacapa Street. That is simply not correct. It's not true. This is an independent project that is owned by an LLC that is an entirely different ownership structure than 29 Cabrillo Street. So I appreciate that the Commission is looking at this project independently. And in so doing, you'll see, as was presented by Mr. Gorin and by staff, that the parking demand is met. With regard to the comment that people do not want to pay for valet parking, that's good because this valet parking is actually free. it is not being charged. So they're not charging for the valet parking. And so the entire project in terms of accessibility and creating accessibility to this specific building and also to the various streets that border this building is of great benefit, not only to the community that is making use of 11 Anacapa Street, but also to the access to the downtown area and to the coastal zone. So I hope that you will consider this and that you'll see that this project was put together with great care and great concern for the public, and that it does, in fact, improve the public's access to the coastal zone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Mr. Porter Kayasbadi? Am I getting closer?
You're
please,
closer.
I'm really,
Hi.
please state your name for the record.
My name is Naren Porter Kasbadi.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
And I'm one of the tenants at the building as of right now. I'm one of the owners of Lighthouse Skate Shop. And it's going to be nice to have a new roof on above the building when it's all done. And yeah, after the microburst a couple of years ago, it tore off part of the roof. So once the roof's all repaired, it's going to be nice. No more leaks. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. Okay, Wally Piot, be followed by Matt Labrie. Welcome.
Hello. Hey, how's it going? My name is Wallace Piot, and I'm a local artist in the Funk Zone. And I've had retail stores on State Street since 1991. I used to own True Grit. And I just want to say that this building that we're in right now has soul, and it has a presence that is kind of a pertinent part of the Funk Zone. I have an art studio there right now and a gallery, and we also design clothing there. And it just has it's a very cool place, and I call it the Creative Island because it's right where the Funk Zone is. We have Europeans coming in saying this is the coolest place, blah, blah, blah. And like he said, the roof blew off in that crazy storm. I was there. I saw the rain come through, and there needs to be a new roof. And I think it's a really neat place, and I think you guys should consider it. And Ray is actually, the owner is actually not only becoming a friend, but he's an ally of the arts. And I think there's good things in this place. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your comments. Mr. Labrie, you'll be followed by Jan Van Yurt.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Commissioners, I'm Matt Labrie. Full disclosure, I will likely be managing this property when it's in its new state, so I don't want to take up any project time, team time to respond. But I also sit on the city's downtown parking committee, and I'm not here on their behalf, but as a parking commissioner or committee member, I've looked at this from is this a sensible parking solution? And I find it very supportable, and I'm here to support the project, obviously. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Van Yurt, followed by Adam White.
Hello, my name is Jan van Yurt. Thank you for your time, Madam Chair. I'm in full support of the project. As people pointed out, this is a very special place in Santa Barbara. I think we can be very proud of the art and the aesthetics of this creative place. It's something who appeals to many people, and it has a special charm I think we should protect. We should consider that. I think it's a great project. It improves ADA. It gives paths which are not there now. So I think that should be in full support. And parking, we will have 15 years from now to talk about parking. Every study will tell you we don't need parking. We need less parking. Look at car manufacturers. They're selling less cars. This is not an issue. I think to hold up a project like that because of parking is really not wise for Santa Barbara. I think we should really show our full support, and I think staff did a really good presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Adam White, followed by Dina Murillo.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners.
Man, there's so much support for the project. I came to support, but I almost feel like going the other way because I'm such an underdog rooter. But I was granted the opportunity to open my first restaurant 20 years ago, almost to the day, by a commission very much like this one. And so these halls hold special meaning to me, and these hearings, which I've been involved with since I was a kid, are very significant to me. And I realize the weight at which you all weigh the issues before you and the time you're giving up. And it's interesting. It's very, I think that commendation is deserved from all of you, no matter which side of any issue you come down on. But I actually own and operate the Fish House restaurant, which is next door to the project and before you for review. And I've only met Ray, a couple of months ago, and don't have any skin in the game other than I basically operate what will be a business in competition with some of his tenants. But I came to support because I was born and raised in Santa Barbara. I've seen what it was like, having the Lower State Street closed for many, many years. I've seen what Ray's projects have done in other spots, and I know what it's like to have a parking lot in this neighborhood. And we opened right about when the skate park did, if you guys are familiar with the skate park that's on the beach side. And those skate kids are, we got to skate, they can be tough, those kids. But we've started doing free valet several years ago because our lot was so impacted by both our own employees and people doing other things, whether it's concert in the park on Thursday or whatever. And valet has been the absolute resolution to any problem for parking. It's really quite amazing. We don't charge for it. I think I said that already. But those guys, they're really good. They can shoehorn these cars in anywhere, and it seems to, it just alleviated that problem, if you're willing to bear the expense which these guys clearly are. And I think it would be great for the block, great for the neighborhood, great for the town, and I hope you guys support it.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Dina Murillo? Great. Followed by Joe Romelli.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Dina Murillo, and I would be called the newest kid on the block. I just opened up a men's retail store called Shine Up in Ray's building on Helena, and I have to say that I've been in Santa Barbara for 11 years doing business. This is my very first store, and I feel very, very lucky to be in this neighborhood. Ray has been wonderful to me, so have all the neighbors. I talk to everybody that comes in my store, and I have to tell you that I have not heard one person say to me, oh my gosh, I couldn't be here because there was no parking. I hear, what an amazing building, what a great place, so glad that you're here. Santa Barbara really needs you. And I just ask you that, you really look at this project as something that we all need. We need the support. We need the foot traffic. We need every little thing that's going to help our community because certainly we are all very much in support of this project and any others that are to come our way to help our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Joe Romelli? Is Joe Romelli here? Yes. There you are. Okay. Followed by Magda Arroyo. Yes, welcome.
Hi, Joe Romelli. I guess a lot of my points, I came to support the project. A lot of my points have already been covered. I think just increasing access to the, compliant with the ADA. And then also, I think having valet would actually increase the parking spots. And also, I think that sometimes having somebody that goes to a restaurant and might have too much wine to drink or something might actually be a deterrent to have to go to a valet and be embarrassed to get in their car and drive. So that was one of the things I was thinking of. And then also the other thing I was thinking of is if you look at the current building, it looks unsafe, the unpermitted part. So I think that's really important with the tragedies that, happened recently, that gives us kind of a framework as to why we have codes and why buildings need to be, safe. So those are the points I wanted to bring up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Magda Arroyo, you're followed by Ray Mahbub. Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Hi, Yana and City Council. Hi, Magda Arroyo. Nice to meet you all. I don't think I've met you all, which is kind of weird. But anyways, I grew up on the west side. I grew up by McKinley School. And so that's definitely where I grew up and where I used to run around. And the way that I see Ray having made the improvements and really dedicating his life and soul, I've known him for a really long time. And the way that he does things are to the book. He holds himself accountable. And when there's things that you need, he does them. He finds solutions, and I've seen that, and that's why I'm supportive of this project. You know, there was something that was mentioned about the valet. The valet, they're providing it free of charge. So I did hear that repeated numerous times, and that's false. So wanted to clarify that, and just wanted to say what a stand-up person is really doing this project and how we could support it. And this community should support it because that has really improved and is because of people like him. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Mabubi, you want to come up? And you'll be followed by Reggie Drew. Is Reggie Drew here? Well, we'll try again.
Planning Commissioners, Ray Mahboub. Thank you for your time. My number one goal when I first purchased the property was to really keep the look of that facade. That was the number one goal because I mean, you couldn't create that even if you tried to hire an architect and say, create a funky building. This is something that took years and over time just got developed and people come from all over the world to take photos of this building. It's been in front cover of Santa Barbara Magazine. It's been in ads. It's been Nike has done commercials in front of it. I mean, it's internationally. Actually, there was a show recently on the History Channel. They actually filmed the building just last month. So my number one goal is to try to preserve the building and to provide more ADA accessibility to the building and ADA parking spaces to the parking lot because currently there isn't any ADA parking spaces. So it'll be really refreshing to provide that. And as far as the valet, just to get it clarified, it will be free. It's free valet and we will not be charging. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, Reggie Drew, welcome. Be followed by Emma Loucher.
Good afternoon. I'm in support of the project. Being in a wheelchair for a year, I can tell you that having the spaces and getting around the property makes a big difference. I don't need it anymore, but I knew what everybody needed, and that's what we need. There, part of this project, the valet is going to be free. Put it in the conditions. Then I don't have to worry about it. Yeah? But I am supporting this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Emma Louter, is Emma Louter here? She had to leave? Okay. John Denidi? He had to go also. Okay. Okay. Jacques Cabra. Is Jacques here? He had to go. Okay. I didn't see his face. Lenny Germano? Is that an O on the end of your name? Did I get that right? German with an O. Okay. Welcome, Mr. German with an O.
Germano.
I know. I was teasing.
I just want to let you guys know that I'm very much in support of this project also. Actually a tenant in Ray's building right next door. I own a wine lounge there. And the support nationwide has been immense. The Funk Zone is a great go-to area. Internationally also, it's been phenomenal. And I think we should just kind of push this through and make this happen. I think it's going to work out for every business owner within the area, and the Funk Zone is a real special place. And Ray's a phenomenal guy, and he's been doing a great job. So I just want to let you guys know I'm in full support.
Great. Thank you very much. So that's all the speaker slips I have. We have some other written communications for the record. We have, bear with me 1 minute here, please, from William Railing of Accessible Santa Barbara, has written a letter, and then he also followed up with a correction to one part of his letter on September 4th, 2019. A letter from, an email from Rick Clausen, and also a letter with an attachment from Anna Marie Gott. So those should be entered into the record too. I think, Ms. Rydell, I got them all, I think, right? Okay, good. Okay, so with that, we're closing public comment. Mr. Gorin has 10 minutes left. Do you want to ask your questions now before he gets his time up? Okay, Commissioner Schwartz, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gorin, come on up. Could you just confirm, if I understood correctly, the accessible parking spaces, and I'm looking at sheet AS103, are these to remain open, or is there a proposal that they be used by valet for, as needed? And could you just clarify that for me?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, they're not valet. They're not for use by valet. They must always be used for a vehicle with a placard. And the way they interface with the valet is that, certainly somebody with a placard could opt to have the valet park their car, but the valet can't park my car there. Okay, I don't have a placard. So if somebody needs to park there and they pull up in an accessible vehicle with a placard and they don't want the valet to go in their car or have their keys or anything, the valet will move this car so that that individual can park in that accessible space. That's how they work.
Okay. So the parking lot could be full, completely at capacity with the valet parked, and if there are no cars with a placard, then those would be open.
Madam Chair.
So that they are open at all times except when a visitor or guest that has a legitimate placard would like to park there.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, that's correct. That's just the same way if I drive into any self-park parking lot, I cannot park in a accessible space.
And I was thinking, since I've been to the Fish House many times, and the times when valet parking has occurred there, I recall that even when that lot is at capacity, I've seen the accessible spaces open because none of those cars parked have a placard. So I was just looking to make sure it's comparable here. Okay, thank you. Let me continue on before I ask staff a question. Mr. Gorin, are you aware of maybe in you or your client in talking to other Funk Zone property owner operators, kind of what the trends are with the need for valet parking? And the reason I'm asking you is that Sherry Villanueva has, and we all know who Sherry is, but the Lark, Lucky Penny, Le Marchand, Laquita, she reported to the Planning Commission that the demand for valet parking is on a steady decline at her properties, that guests or visitors are coming through other means. It's either the park once and they're walking to this property from other properties, or they're using ride sharing, some ride sharing modes. Do you have any information that would be newer or support Ms. Villanueva's comments to us?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, I don't personally, I haven't reviewed any data like that individually for this. All I can say is that seems consistent with what the city's Funk Zone parking study also seems to indicate. So, and it's consistent with my experience going to the Funk Zone. I take Uber down there. And yeah.
I'll ask you, but then also to ask staff to think about this. There's been a number of comments about the valet parking being no charge. We have this elsewhere, including Fish House and other places. Is that something that would be potentially desirable, appropriate to incorporate into the conditions of approval, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, that's up to your commission. You know, obviously I always prefer less conditions,
Yes,
but
I
it's a
understand.
proposal.
Okay.
It's part of the project description.
Okay.
So you could include it in the project description maybe, or a condition if that's something that you find is necessary to be able to support the findings
Yes.
that we're asking you to make.
Okay, and then this, the language that's used to describe the triggering of valet parking. So I'm looking, this is page 100 of 130 in our packet, and it's page 2 of the conditions of approval under valet parking operation. So a parking attendant shall be on duty at all times. The restaurant use is in operation. So I'll pause there, but then on the prior page, conditions of approval, a valet parking operation for the site during restaurant hours. I don't know if this is kind of a term of art, you know, restaurant hours, hours of operation. Are we all going to be clear about what that really means? Is it when deliveries start to come? Now, that's not when customers arrive, but there could be other. Do you have any thoughts for me about that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, I believe they mean those things to be synonymous, and that they mean when the restaurant is open and operating, that's what generates the parking demand that's in the study. If there's just a couple of employees there setting up the bar, that's obviously not generating 14 spaces. That comes from the restaurant being open. And I think if we go back...
So when the customer, I mean, I could assume this, but I wanted to have you walk me through it because I'm inclined to say we need the same language. You can tell kind of where I come from on this.
Sure, and we were talking about that on the previous item, and
That's right.
it's good to be consistent.
I
But
think so.
back on these statistics here, I would point you to this, that we have 17 spaces available when there's no valet on the site, and the projected parking demand, the highest ever, is 8. So we have twice as much parking as that projected peak. So I think if there's an employer that's there in the restaurant, it's not going to exceed our available parking by a long measure.
One other question for you. I didn't see in the conditions of approval, and I don't know if we have on other projects, I was trying to recall any requirement and opportunity, I'll say on the other side of requirement, to retain what I consider to be the artwork, the unique signage and artwork on the Helena side of the property and on the building. So with the improvements proposed, and I was looking, I don't know if we have a sheet here that might speak to the retention and protection of some of that or all of that art signage.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, our proposal doesn't include any significant revisions to that side of the building. So basically it's left in its current condition. And if somebody was to come in and want to substantially alter that, that's a ABR permit. That's an exterior alteration to a commercial structure, and that would get scrutiny at that point. And I think it would get a lot of scrutiny.
Yes, I would think so. And I I didn't want to assume, even though I didn't see anything in our package, because I didn't know whether any adjustments need to be made or would need to be made to conform to other building code, current building code requirements or any other more modern requirements to bring it up. So to your knowledge, all of this, I'm looking at G011 in this particular photographic view of Helena, and as we did walk through there on our site visit.
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, I think to your point, this is a really unique case where this project, most projects that come in front of you are conceptual. This project has made it all the way through a complete building permit plan check before it ever came here, because it was going to be done with a coastal exemption that later on all of us, staff and our project team included, decided it would be better to bring this before you for a coastal development permit. But the building permit, it's ready to go right now. So we don't have to be as concerned about what building triggers might change elevation alterations later on, because we already know what all of those are right now, and they're not changing that.
Okay. So then just lastly, I just want to understand, so the letter that Mr. Mahboub sent, this is June 19th letter, for nearly 2 years, working with the planning department to get permits, for this, that, and the other, is that what's ready to go? Is those permits pending planning commission approval and anything else? Is that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, that's correct.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I've only been on it for a year and change, so a lot of people have been at this a lot longer than I have.
Yes, okay. Let me just think. I think those may be my questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Commissioner Campanella?
Thank you. Question for staff. The Garden Street parking lot, do we know how far away that is? Is that 500 feet, 600 feet away? Do we know at all?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Campanella, I do not have that information.
Okay. So, unless I'm wrong, there's a number of instances down, within our commercial districts, and also I think down here, if there's parking available within so many feet of a business, remote, that you would maybe not have to park on site at all. Is that correct? Certain circumstances, just a general comment.
Commissioner Campanella, I think you're referring to our off-site parking allowance within the municipal code. However, that does not relate to public parking lots. So that's only if you're able to find off-site parking in a private lot that was not required for another use.
Okay. But this, let's say there's proximity to public parking lots that wouldn't be part of an approval process, but practically would be available, especially for those that are walking, I don't want to say in a straight line because maybe a lot of people don't, but trying to walk in a straight line over to State Street, there would be...
That's why Mr. Gorin takes Uber.
Yeah. Okay. Familiarity. No, I presume not. Okay, so there is that, and we're tying into something that's already in place. As they said already, a handicap path of travel, et cetera. Is it possible, this is a city question, since we're looking at circulation, et cetera, is it possible to suggest, from a city standpoint, not the applicant standpoint, that perhaps some type of crosswalk or passive straggle or diagonal lines go across Anacapa Street on the pathway that we're talking about to let drivers know that that actually could be a pedestrian path, a second, instead of going all the way down to the corner and having pedestrian gridlock trying to get around Cabrillo and State Street.
Good afternoon, Chair Wiscombe and Mr. Campanella. So I am not a traffic engineer. I'm Chelsea Swanson with Transportation Planning. But when looking at crosswalk placements, you typically do not want to put them mid-block where people might not be expecting them without, we see them on Cabrillo with flashers and lots of attention drawn to them. But you wouldn't typically put it in the middle of the street, you're suggesting. Okay. So always something our traffic engineer can look into, but
okay. What about let's say what side am I working with? I guess I'm working with the south side of the property. If we can put, one more question, if you could put the site plan back up, or the landscape plan, whichever. Okay, yeah, that one. There's a pretty, looks to be, including the planners, I don't know what's going in there, whether it's on the south side, the ocean side of the parking lot where the tandem cars are. I don't know how much of that curb space is really available, but I guess I would ask the question to the city, if we are in the new age of sharing, whether the city has thought about, or would this be a place to consider a pickup zone? For example, a lot of cities, airports, you have to go to a designated spot, and we don't have a lot of those downtown. It's like, I'm over here, so cross over the street because I can't park over there because somebody complained. But especially I don't know if there's any in this area, but would that be something that the city might consider assuming this project, when this project went forward, to maybe restrict 3 or 4 or 5, whatever the spaces are there, to get maybe multiple pickup and get them off the middle of the street, or have people having to go down to the corner or some other spot in order to get picked up. Is that a possibility?
And just to clarify, you're talking about a designated zone on Anacapa Street in front of the...
Yeah, like for Uber or Lyft, that's white curb pickup, passenger pickup.
Right. What I do know is out of the Funk Zone parking and access study, there's an action plan, and there's actionable items that are moving forward with right now and that the city's looking at. It's in the hands of downtown parking, but one of those action items was to look at where to designate drop-off and pickup zones for ride sharing. So that's definitely being looked into I think right now, and is an effort that will be coming forward. I don't think we're looking at it, we're looking at the whole area, so not project by project, but where the best shared space could be utilized by the uses around it. So that's definitely being analyzed.
Okay, so we're in public right away. It's not something for the applicant, but just looking at, let's say, the concentration of restaurants and tasting rooms across the way, that this might be a candidate and alleviate some of the need for people to be driving in and tenant parking. It'd be a good spot for it. When do you think that's going to be developed?
I don't have the specific timing on that effort. I did speak with downtown parking staff today, and looked like there was a range of each effort. Some were happening in the next 4 months, some were 6 months, some were 18 months. I think that was the longest. And they're looking at a variety of things. So pretty near term, I would say.
Okay.
If I can just add to that, because I'm on the liaison to the Downtown Parking Committee, I think it's, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 35% of people, well, no, that's take public transportation, I guess. I don't know how many take Uber and Lyft, but that is one of the priorities, is to develop designated places where people can go and say, I'm here at the designated spot for Uber and Lyft, and, this is where you can find me on Anacapa or on Cabrillo or wherever it happens to be. So it is one of the priorities of that particular study.
Okay. I have one more question for staff. The Helena Street facade, is any of that considered historical, or it's relative to protection? And I know it's being retained right now, but is it part of an historical
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Campanella, it is not. We haven't analyzed it, but it's not. It's not on a potential list or any kind of historic designation as of now.
Is it just not be addressed, or
it's not been addressed?
Is it something that could be addressed or should be addressed? And again, that's not the purview of what we're looking at, but right now it has to stay, and then specifically you'd have to go back to ABR for a change. But I was just wondering if retention, or whatever level of retention, photo, plaque, whatever in the future may have to be done, should there be some look at this from it's being preserved quite nicely by the applicant. It'd be nice to keep it that way.
Well, the planning division does have an urban historian, but she looks to very specific criteria for historic designations, and I'm not knowledgeable about that. We could ask her about it. But that facade, I think, happened over time organically, and probably a lot of those improvements are not permitted improvements, so that could complicate things. I'm not sure.
I think that's probably, in my mind, that's a good historical nature in the context of what went on there. The fact that people would make those changes over the year, I think, is really dynamic that occurred down there, and the creativity that went on. So rather than it being in some register, I just think the idea of what occurred, it's public art to me, and I think maybe that should be addressed at some point by our historian. I'd like to see that.
I think we need to stick with the item we have at hand.
Yeah, we may not get back to this again in our lifetimes, so...
we can make it a lunch item.
It really is, and I think, we're talking about redevelopment of a parcel, and the ability to retain some context is a credit to the project, and hopefully that can be followed up on. Let's see what else. That's all I have on questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 6 of the staff report, it says, refers to the Funk Zone study and intercept survey. I assume that means people were stopped and asked how they got there. And of the respondents, 35% used active modes of transportation, meaning anything but an automobile of their own. Is that correct? Like such as Uber or bus or bike, but they walk there. Then it says the parking demand study thought the 35% reduction of the parking demand showed up in this survey, that 35% came some other way than a private car, was appropriate for this location. I guess I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. And it goes on to refer to the IT rates being based on very different kinds of situations. Are there any other studies that have been done in similar kinds of locations?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Lodge, when you say are there other studies that have been done, do you mean specific to taking alternative modes to destination, or could you be a little more specific?
Yeah.
The parking demand study is looked at a couple things, and one was the shared peak parking demand of different uses on the same site, so different times of day, different uses peaking. And then the restaurant was the real driver of the demand. It's the highest. So the 35% reduction was only applied to the restaurant use. And that did come from the Funk Zone study. So the city, at least to my knowledge, hasn't conducted similar studies like we have in the Funk Zone for parking, as far as surveys and things like that. But it was, and I have a little bit of the data here if you want to know any more about the percentages. There were customers, there was a customer breakdown, and then there was an employee breakdown, so they differed a bit as far as percentages of who drove, who didn't drive. So,
was the percentage the same for employees?
So 35%, I believe, was the overall. So of everyone surveyed, that 35% said that they did come by alternative modes. I believe the percentage of employees was higher for driving. It's an area where employees drive more than anywhere else, probably because there's so much unrestricted parking there. A lot of the city downtown, it's 90-minute, and so it's really hard to park. And then you have the RPP. In the Funk Zone, we have a lot of unrestricted on-street parking, so it's easier for an employee to park and keep their vehicle there all day. So that's probably the reason why we're seeing the higher numbers there. So yeah, the customer component, customers were driving much less than employees in the surveys. So.
Okay, well, that makes some sense. And then for Mr. Bowman, California Coastal Act policies, and one that's cited is maintenance and enhancement of public access. I'm a little puzzled as to how this project increases public access. It certainly makes it a lot better for the handicapped with the accessibility part of the ramps and so on.
I don't think we were trying to assert that it enhances public access, but that it maintains it by providing its parking on site. Even though it's an intensification of use, it's going to have more parking demand than the existing situation, that it would provide parking on site to meet its demand in accordance with that parking modification finding. So this coastal policy is closely related to that parking modification finding, that it provides the parking to meet demand and doesn't cause an impact to off-site parking or access.
Okay, and then, I'll let it go with that. and then I certainly would like to see added in the conditions of approval on page 2 of 9 of the staff report under Valley Operation 3B, simply at the end of that, where it's the Public Works Department, valet parking shall be free. I personally would like to see that made part of the conditions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Higgins.
Okay, thank you. The Garden Street lot, and I apologize for not making the site visit. You probably covered this on Tuesday, but is that connection now installed through the Hughes property? It's to staff or whoever would like to take it.
Sure, Madam Chair, Commissioner Higgins. Yes, that exists.
Okay. When did that go in?
That went in, I think, within the last year or so. I know it was taking a really long time to design the actual connection between Mr. Hughes's property and the city lot itself.
My recollection of that was there was some stumbling block.
It was the connection through to the city lot because Kim had to put in the whole ramp and everything that goes along at the finished floor elevation of his building. That was put in beforehand by him with the anticipation that it would connect to this final piece that punches it through to the lot.
Stay there. I guess one question for you. It's sort of this odd public comment letter from the gentleman who was Accessible Santa Barbara. I just find it ironic the level of improvement for ADA accessibility, but yet there's still sort of a Coastal Act argument he's making. What do you make of that?
Chair Wiscombe.
And have you communicated with him directly, or?
Commissioner Higgins, yeah, we've communicated a lot with Mr. Railing, and we're also perplexed by that. And when I read his letter, the majority of the points that he brings up in his letter don't seem to be complaining about accessibility issues on our project. He seems to be trying to make some case for why this other completely approved and like almost ready to open project next door somehow is part of this project, or that kind of thing. I didn't see. I don't understand why a guy who purports to represent the accessibility issues in the community has a big problem with our project.
Okay. Well, if you're confused, that makes me feel better than I am too. So, question for staff. We talk a lot about the funk zone and the availability of on-street parking. Can somebody explain to me why there is somebody doing curbside vending from a oversized vehicle, and why that vehicle is allowed to park in the right of way and conduct commercial activities? And the vehicle I'm talking about typically parks in front of the beer place, or right at Yadanali and Anacapa. Yeah. You must know what I'm talking about. There's somebody selling, it's not food vending out of a car or a trailer, it's commercial retail. You guys don't go to the funk zone.
Sorry, Commissioner Higgins, we are not aware of that particular vehicle.
I'm not aware of it either.
So, okay, let me ask it a different way. If I wanted to sell, conduct a commercial activity in a truck that's not a food truck, but it looks like a food truck, but it's not selling food.
Something like a Tundra?
Could I do that out of my vehicle in the right of way?
Higgins, I'm trying to make the connection to that property, but I'm going to answer your question. There is new street vending laws. I'm not as up on it. It's part of our prosecution side, so I will just make note of it and have them look into that for you.
And you'll advise me that it's not on the agenda. Okay, thanks. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Lodge, did you have something else?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I remembered another question I meant to ask. And this relates to the aesthetics of the project. We were told on the site visit that another utility pole would be added with transformers and so on, and I don't, Mr. Bowman, I asked you if I could find out where the city is with funding through Southern California Edison for undergrounding, since there are not very many pools in that immediate area. Did you have a chance to do that?
I didn't do the research on the funding for undergrounding, but we did find that stretch of poles on Anacapa is for the public, not for this project. So in other words, the project's not required to do undergrounding because the overhead utilities serve the public in multiple properties. But Mr. Hendel's here from Public Works Engineering.
Okay, thank you.
Chair and members of the Planning Commission, Adam Hendel, Principal Engineer in Public Works. Commissioner Lodge, you asked a specific question about the city's Rule 20A balance for public utility undergrounding, and that's not on the agenda, but we are getting ready to kick off a process to select some projects for Rule 20A undergrounding. We have enough balance after the Cliff Drive project to recommence that efforts for utility undergrounding.
Is this area one of the ones that would be considered?
We need to identify and prioritize, and historically the Planning Commission has been the advisory agency to the city on making that Rule 20A selection. So the coastal zone, arterial streets in the coastal zone, potentially Anacapa Street could qualify for that. Whether it's selected or not, we'll have to see.
Okay, thank you. The ABR granted a waiver on the interior landscaping on this project, and they also allowed a reduction of the landscaping on the frontage. So and there are now some rather large tree shrubs in the middle of the parking space. So I'm uncomfortable with that. But that's what they chose to do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. I had a couple questions. Did you have one question, Commissioner Schwartz? Okay, go ahead, please.
So if I were interested in ensuring that the property owner is not required, he may choose otherwise, to do something about this, but not required to remove the artistic signage on the Helena side of the building at any juncture in new permit, anything, is there a process for that? I don't know. I could say it more simply. I can see the befuddled look on Ms. Ostringer's. Should I put it in just very blatant terms? If I want to block the ABR from requiring removal of artistic signage on this building, should the property owner not want to remove the artistic signage on the building, and it's not designated historic, so there's no other protection tool that we have, is there a process for that?
Is this really pertinent to what we are?
I just want to understand if there's a process for that,
this is not
whether it's part of
pertinent
today.
to, we are not doing anything on the Helena Street side, and I think
understand. I
that's
heard
a
that,
very
Madam Chair.
fair question, but I don't think we should take up time with process on how to go through that at a hearing where we have an applicant here for something and we're not touching the Helena Street side. Unless someone on staff has a quick answer to the question.
Okay. When this project continues on, for some final determination, I'll flip my question. When this project continues on for any final determination, any final approvals beyond today, is there any vulnerability that will surface that would mandate or require that any of this be changed on the Helena side, or no?
Commissioner
So I'll ask
Wiscombe,
it that way.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Schwartz. The ABR's been very comfortable with the project when they continued it to the Planning Commission for this hearing.
Okay.
They're very comfortable with the exterior improvements, and they've looked in detail at the two facades that are being renovated.
Okay.
And they've not looked at the other facades. So I think it's just fine as is. The ABR will pick up where they left off. They're not going to expand the scope of their review. They've looked at it many times already.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Okay, my question's related just to a couple of small things. Mr. Gorin, you showed the I don't know if you showed her, or I think it was on your slide of slide number 9, where you showed, this slide, yeah, where you showed the gray. So I just want to clarify that the area that is permeable pavement is going to be decorative permeable pavement. Is that correct? Because you're removing a lot of landscaping in there. You know, you're removing the 2 islands with some pretty nice foliage, actually. So is that the direction from the ABR, and is that your intent is that the permeable areas as shown on the plan will be decorative permeable paving of some sort?
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's correct. It's supposed to be decorative. It's mitigating for the fact that we don't have internal landscaping in the parking lot. And even though we are removing those islands, that the square footage of those islands is being replaced with a far greater square footage of landscaping. It's just around the perimeter.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a question on, go back on the same slide, you can go back to the accessible stalls, because I think I beg to differ with you that, okay, let's say someone pulls into the accessible van space, okay, Mr. Gorin? And then the valet parks someone in space number 43, which is the tandem space to it, and parks someone in space number 42, which is next to it. I think that I would assume that both 43 and 42, the tandem park cars, will need to be moved because you can't block the accessible aisle, and you will have a car blocking the accessible aisle. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, no, that's not, because the accessible aisle, it ends next to the space. The purpose of that is a loading, unloading zone for the accessible spaces, not through travel to the rest of the parking lot. So.
No, I'm not saying it's through travel. It's the accessible aisle for the ADA spaces. It's where they can get out, and it's graded properly, and they can, if they're in wheelchairs, they can get out and they can be safe in that accessible striped space.
Madam Chair, that's correct. No car can park in that striped area.
Yeah. But how are you going to, is that going to block someone? Is that aisle going to be blocked by someone parked tandem behind it? That's my question.
No, because the tandem space behind it, by nature of the fact that it's behind it, doesn't overlap that area at all. So somebody parked behind it can't even potentially obstruct that area.
Well, so you'll have to go through the space number 43 and then make a right-hand turn and a left-hand turn to get to the accessible aisle.
Madam Chair, that's not correct. If you go directly through space 42, you're in the van accessible space, and the loading area for that is directly adjacent to it. You just get out of the car right into that loading area. The loading area is flanked on both sides by accessible spaces.
Okay, maybe I'm not reading your striping plan correctly.
If I could have it, I don't have a pointer that works with staff's presentation, but does anybody have a laser pointer? I could maybe explain it.
I just feel that you might have a car.
It's not on my computer.
Yeah. That you might know. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. It's not worth it.
Madam Chair, if I might make a comment, the building and safety department goes into this extensively.
Right.
And they would not allow something that would cause a conflict with Chapter 11.
All I'm saying is that Mr. Gorin was talking about moving one car.
I felt you said with Commissioner Schwartz, you're going into something that is beyond the purview of what we're dealing with here.
Okay. Mr. Gorin made a comment about moving one car, and I was saying I still think that the accessible aisle is blocked, and I just wanted clarification of that. Okay, those are my only questions, so we will move on. Mr. Gorin, you had 10 minutes left. Would you like to use it?
Madam Chair, I'll use a small portion of it.
Okay, great. Go right ahead.
So I think the only thing I'd like to address that hasn't come up in a question so far is Ms. Gott mentioned something about how there was a parking agreement and then it expired, and now there's a new parking agreement, and this is like a smoking gun as to why none of this works. And the non-conforming parking is not, it's not contingent upon when an agreement's in fact. The staff determines non-conforming parking based on what a historic use is in a structure. The parking could be on Mars, if they would count that. Or it could be with a new agreement that never even existed before. If I didn't have an agreement at all between my property and a property next door, and now I want to use a use that generates more parking, and my friendly neighbor next door is willing to give it to me, there's a parking agreement that never even existed before that now meets my parking requirement. So it's irrelevant whether a previous parking agreement went away and was reestablished or not. That has absolutely nothing to do with the parking next door or our parking on this project. And I'll go back and reiterate that our parking demand for this project is met, excluding anything having to do with any parking to the project next door. And I think the project next door is approved. They're almost finished building it. I think let's let that project go at this point. And skate kids can be tough. And I know firsthand because my kid is one of those kids. And Mr. White, if you're still watching this anywhere, I know what you're going through, and I'm sorry. That's all I've got, unless you got any other questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's the end of that. Commissioner Higgins, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of the request, and the irony of the Coastal Act is that it's to encourage people to get to the beach, and factually, a lot of people don't actually like to go to the beach. They like to drive by the beach, or they like to get to the beach area. So revitalizing area in the coastal zone brings people to the beach area that may not want to put their toes in the sand. And I suppose they can see more of the beach while they're driving around looking for parking, but maybe strike that. So, I go to the Funk Zone quite a bit, not in the evening, but during the day, when people would be going to the beach. And this particular beach isn't a beach that people are driving to. The beach that I think is used down there is used by people that are in hotels already and walking. So it's just not a beach that people drive to. But I do go down there a lot, taking my kids to the skate park or Channel Islands or Junior Guards or anything. I don't really ever have a huge problem parking. I do recognize that it's getting more popular, but I wouldn't want to block, cause this particular project to be some sort of victim of the Funk Zone success. So I'm supportive of it, and I think we should be thankful that somebody's willing to take risk down there to make that revitalization happen. It's no small risk.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. Well, I support the project. I think it will be an improvement to a very dilapidated building down there. In some ways, I hate to see us take the funk out of the Funk Zone, and anytime anybody wants to improve a building, city staff and the city ordinances and the state laws require so many things to be done that it ends up almost being unfunky. But that's just the way it is. It is what it is. And the building needs to be renovated and repaired. I mean, it's taken a pretty bad beating in that storm a couple years ago. So as far as the parking, it meets the zoning as long as there's a demand study that says that the parking demand of the uses in the building will be met. So I can easily support that. So I, at the appropriate time, would move that we approve the project with the findings and the conditions in the staff report.
Are you making that motion, or?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in support of the project, but I would like to comment on a number of areas. I understand some of the concern, trepidation, and anticipation of potential parking pressures here. To make the parking modification finding, I would ask my colleagues to possibly consider revising or including as a revision in our conditions of approval under the valet parking operation to require that it be at no charge to visitors. I know this is not ideal for the applicant, but I think that for this project and going forward, not to just burden this project, perhaps that's a condition that we could require consistently in our denser, more impacted areas. I'll look forward to hearing my colleagues' comments about that. Otherwise, the only thing I mentioned on the conditions, which I'd like to see aligned, and Mr. Gorin acknowledged that that would be appropriate, is to use the same language on this again is Exhibit A, on the first page of the conditions of valet parking operation for the site during restaurant hours, and either choose that as the language to put in the next page under valet parking operation at all times the restaurant uses is in operation. So let's just decide which language is more accurate, consistent, and use the same phrasing. That's what I'm getting to. Now, I want to make some general comments if I could, but I want to start with parking, although I have to tell you I'm getting really tired of talking about parking on every project, every policy hearing. I just wish we could find a way to have some level of discussion about parking, but that it not dominate the community planning and policy making of our city. To me, that's just so unenlightened, and Commissioner Higgins knows I love to use that word. This is unenlightened community planning and land use planning. So I don't know how we start to move away and rebalance our policy making and project approval discussions, but I'd like to see that happen. Let me just mention some things about the Funk Zone in general. In 2010, it was my first year on Planning Commission, I began some discussions, just exploratory discussions with then planner Betty Weiss about how we could master plan the Funk Zone to do what? To consider evolving coastal zone policies that were coming out of the Coastal Commission, to look at anticipated turnover of properties, gentrification, increase in land use values. What would that mean? All of these legal non-conforming, non-code compliant structures, antiquated parking requirements, older uses, trades, artisans. What do we have now? We did not do that, and I understood our planning department's reluctance to engage in a multi-year, very complex master planning process. However, look where we are now, 2019. My frustration, and I don't know what else we can do about it, but I have to say it today, and I think I've said it before. What are we left with? Trying to plan on a project by project, parcel by parcel basis, and what's happened. This project today and this building that we have before us today, to me, is like ground zero of what we're looking at in not figuring out a more comprehensive way to save the artisans, to save individual entrepreneurial merchants who we want to have in the city of Santa Barbara. We don't want to push them to Goleta or push them to Ventura. And thank you, Mr. Mahboob, for being willing to invest and be a part of this, because I don't see many other investor entrepreneurs being willing to do this. It's a long, hard road, and I hope you'll stay with it, and I hope this gets done. Two of my three brothers were surfers and skateboarders, and I know they were down in the Funk Zone when my mother couldn't find them elsewhere. So we need this kind of recreational activity, and we need to preserve a way to help these tenants remain there. Otherwise, deteriorating buildings, non-code compliant buildings, it'll be demolition by neglect. That's what we're going to face in the Funk Zone. And then all the funk will be gone. All of the uniqueness will be gone. And what will we have left? Not an interesting, economically vital part of our community. I love what one member of the public said, that this building has soul, it's cool. That's why the funk zone is so attractive. And Commissioner Campanella continues to encourage me to get down there more often. Thank you for that. He calls me to say, you've got to try this place and go down during these hours. And we all have to do that to understand the transformation that's occurring right before our eyes and why it's so attractive. So what is it? What is that magic? What's the essence of what's down there that's so appealing to both locals and visitors? And how can we balance that with allowing for property improvements, bringing buildings up to code? We want them to be safer, and not lose sight of the fact if we go too far in our process and in our requirements, we'll ultimately push property owner investors to simply raise these buildings down, start new, and how is that going to be attractive to the community? So I say all of this because I've recently traveled to some other cities, for example, on the East Coast, that were established in the 1600s and 1700s, and they are very intentionally planning to keep their waterside, historic, funky, older buildings, similar to what's happening here with Mr. Mahboob's property, while bringing them up to code, kind of adaptive reuse. And I can tell you the places I went to, they are the draw in these cities. And because they're unique, because they're not chain restaurants, they're not chain stores. And I think we have a real opportunity with this project and others, yes, on a project by project basis, unfortunately, in my opinion, to strike this balance in our policy making and in project approval. So I'm just hoping for those who either are here still in the chambers or are watching and have written to us, please find a way forward to support the project, however, whatever accommodations or compromise are needed in order to not force the property owner, for all intents and purposes, to simply demolish this building and all the charm, the coolness, the soul that's there today. Let's see how we can do that together. That's my plea, and so I'll be supporting the project, and I've already made some other comments about conditions of approval. Look forward to my colleagues' comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am in support of the project. I think if I look at that plan, the amount of income-generating redevelopment that's going on to support 5 or 6 times improvements going on is a great undertaking by the individual. I mean, you're pretty much, no pun intended, but I think you're tapped out pretty much on what you can do with restaurant space and other entertainment space. But you're making that investment and adding a lot of parking to the area that, adding a lot of parking that right now is not really being utilized. Keeping buildings in place, redeveloping, and without any, that I know about, any city assistance except a parking modification. So if we think back, we don't have a redevelopment agency, and when we were redeveloping, the amount of money that the city had to invest and put into projects, here we have a private LLC or partnership that's willing to do that investment on their own, and they're just asking for a substantiated break from what is normally required. So I think at least we could make that effort. The only thing I'd like to change on this valet parking operations, let me go back to one other thing. Whether it be pickup or mid-block crossings or whatever, I think whatever your plans are from Public Works Department and downtown parking, I think you have a chance here to try to implement some of those on this site, given what you see. And I think the property owner has given you a very good lead in to adding some additional complementary opportunities to implement what you're talking about for the funk zone. So whether that be pickup or crosswalks or other things you can think about, gathering spots, I don't know what else there may be, but keep people off Cabrillo, let's say, and keep them circulating within this particular area in a mid-block situation would be good. Not only for ease of getting across, but also their stopping places, whether it be the wine tasting rooms of this particular beer hall or walking through the state. I think try to get the circulation going and get public use and benefit out of the surroundings that you're thinking about. Here's an opportunity to do it. The only change I would make, I think, in this valet operation is B, where we go to if any time you're unable to satisfy blah, blah, blah. I think that should be eliminated. I can't see how that would be enforced. You have enough language in here that says you can't. I don't think we need you better not, as well as you can't. And I don't know how you practically do that. The most I'd go for is, say, put a lot full sign up, as a condition. But to put this threat of closure on, I just don't, I think this is overkill. And I would recommend whoever's making the motion to eliminate that sentence in B and maybe insert something else that might be satisfactory to the motion maker. But again, I wouldn't go more than lot full so people know not to pull into the driveway. But other than that, good project, and be interested to see how it turns out and to be taking Uber down there to go enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. So what I'm hearing here, that I guess we need to discuss further, and I do support the project. I think it's a really nice project, and I'm actually quite thankful that Helena is not getting changed at all. So I think that's the right way to go. So we have a couple things here. Commissioner Campanella just suggested that we eliminate a sentence: if at any time during the operations of the valet facility it is unable to satisfy the parking demand on site and queuing, loading, or storing of vehicles in the right-of-way occurs, the operation shall be temporarily closed until the demand can be properly handled. Right? That's the sentence you'd like eliminated.
Yeah, I'd like the motion maker to entertain removing that sentence.
Okay.
From the conditions.
Okay, so that's number one. Number two is Commissioner, I believe it was Commissioner Schwartz, mentioned free valet parking and as a condition. And then the third thing that I heard was to use the same language, be consistent with the language. And I'd actually make a suggestion. There's language in here about, I got to find it again, but when restaurant use is in operation, I think that's fairly clear, and if we could be consistent perhaps with that phrase, so not when the restaurant's open, but just continue that phrase throughout whenever there's any reference to it, I think that would be good too. So,
Chair Wiscombe?
Yes.
And so one of the things, because I was trying to, as I was reading it, I caught the ambiguity and the change in the language, and one of the things I was going to suggest, if the commission wanted to consider it, was that a parking attendant shall be on duty at all times the restaurant is open for business to the public, because I think there was a question about the restaurant when it actually opens, because restaurants are often operating earlier before they're open to the public.
Okay, how about the only, I guess the only concern I have about that is sometimes it isn't open to the public because it has a private event. So that's why it's suggested when it's in use. But
open to the public or in use for a private event.
It's fine with me. Yeah, I just think that oftentimes restaurants are used for private events, so that would be fine. Okay, so that's number one. And then I think the maker of the motion, do you want to talk about the free valet parking and?
Okay, well, the issue about free valet, the property owner and the project proponent has already said that they have no objection to that, so I would have no objection to putting that into the conditions. As far as eliminating the sentence about any time the operations is unable to satisfy, et cetera, I think we've already had that explained that wasn't meant to be on an hour-by-hour basis, but in the long term, if it turns out that the demand is more than what was predicted, then the project would stop until it could be figured out how to meet the requirement. It wasn't meant to be on an hour-by-hour, minute-by-minute basis. So I don't see the need to take it out. I'm not sure it makes a big difference if we do take it out, because if it turns out that there's a problem, Public Works would probably want to get involved with reevaluating the parking requirements there anyway. So I would say go ahead and take it out as part of my motion. Change the wording as the city attorney has suggested regarding the operation.
Okay, but not,
operation.
you're not suggesting to remove.
No, I'm saying go ahead and take it out, because it certainly is less restrictive, even though I don't know that we really need to take it out, but it certainly would be beneficial to the project proponent not to have any more restrictions in there. So.
Okay. Okay, so you're in agreement then with all three conditions
Yes, I
as
am.
the maker of the motion. Okay. And Commissioner Higgins, you were the seconder.
Yeah, seconder, I go along with all that. Although I'll just say the free valet is, to make the thing move along faster with maybe other regulatory bodies that pick at this, that's fine. But, on the other hand, if we're trying to get people out of their cars and use other forms of transportation, we don't want to necessarily make it easier on them to have free valet, but I'll go along with whatever. So.
As long as it doesn't mean that we can't give them a tip for parking the car.
Okay. Or a mandatory tip, maybe.
Certain kind of cars are free in other places.
Like Toyota Tundras or...
Trucks you have to tip really well.
Okay. Commissioner Campanella. Oh, okay. You're okay. Okay. So we have a motion and a second, and no further discussion, no further lights on. So the language for the restaurant use, Ms. Ostranger, can you go over that one more time?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioners, it would read, a parking attendant shall be on duty at all times the restaurant is open for business to the public or operating a private event.
Okay, great. Okay, and then we have the free valet parking, which will just be added as a condition, correct? That's, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
We can add it as a subsection C of 3, if you'd like.
Okay. Okay, great. Yes, 3C. Okay. And then everyone, I guess, is in agreement. I would have left it in, but everyone else seems to be in agreement to take out the sentence, delete the sentence, if at any time, and this is 3B, during the operations of the valet facility. So that gets removed. So that's our motion, and all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great, that carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Okay. Yes. Yes, we have a 10-day appeal period for the permit approval that we just issued. Thank you. 10-day appeal period to City Council. Okay. Item number 4, administrative agenda. Staff hearing officer liaison report, and Commissioner Jordan's not here. So do we have other committee and liaison reports? Commissioner Schwartz?
Thank you. Commissioner Thompson and I, though we have finished our working group meetings on the Olive Mill Coast Village Road roundabout, now we have follow-on public hearings. As you may know, the first one has already occurred, a joint City ABR Montecito BAR hearing. There were some subsequent concerns by nearby stakeholders. These are nearby property owners, and so Commissioner Thompson and I decided that it would be prudent for us to meet on our own with staff to review those neighbor concerns. I'm very pleased to say that staff was receptive. I think it was a productive meeting. Subsequently, I attended the Montecito Association Land Use Committee public hearing where both county and city staff made a presentation to that committee, along with standing room only residents of Montecito turning out to hear the presentation, ask questions, and express some concerns they have about the design, placement, safety, etc. of the currently proposed roundabout. So I want to announce to everybody, if you're interested, that Friday, October 11th, from 3 to 5 p.m., the David Gevhart Room at 630 Garden Street will be the second or next public hearing, and that again will be a joint City ABR and Montecito BAR hearing. If you'd like to attend, speak, that will be the next public opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the work group that's meeting on the objective design standards, we're continuing our meetings, and with the idea that we should be wrapping up by the end of October, checking in with AIA at the end of those several meetings that we have coming up, and then followed by a public educational event sometime either late October or the beginning of November. And then next Monday at ABR, there is a project, AUD project, that's coming in with state density bonus application. So I don't know, but I think that might be the first one to do that. So I'll report on it at our next meeting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. I just have one item to add. I attended the Harbor Commission's Commercial Fishing Subcommittee special meeting, which was held on August 22nd, where we actually went on a tour of the commercial fishermen's various sites. And we started at the harbor and got a rundown of what they have and what their needs are. And then we went to the Garden Street facility and toured that. And then we went to Bond Avenue, where we toured the seafood processing. And it's pretty interesting. In processing, they have 38 employees, and they process over 1 million pounds of fish per year. It's pretty astounding. But at all three facilities, we had an opportunity to hear about what their needs are, and if any of my fellow commissioners would like more information, I can put my notes, which are basically scrawled out now in some sort of logical order, and send them off to you. So that's all I have to report. And
I have a question on that.
Yes.
The bond facility was the subject of some pretty intense neighborhood complaints because of incompatibility with the neighborhood, residential or even commercial operations, due to the particular aroma processing fish. Mm-hmm. Was that discussed?
Yes, it was. And they have I'm going to get this wrong. They have a machine there. Yes, ozone. And that's the word I was going to use. But it's added to the water when they rinse down the fish, and it really kills the odor. And Brian Crocker said that they basically, when that machine goes down, he said that's the first thing they fix, because that's eliminated a lot of the problems with the neighbors for the odor.
So the neighborhood is quieted down now. They're happy with
That's
it.
my understanding. Okay. I probably city staff would know better, but he said that's definitely helped with the issues with the neighbors. Yeah. So, and their facility is about 3,000 square feet, and he said we could use 10,000 square feet. You know, they could use a much bigger facility than they have.
Well, there was a big facility on the corner of Cesar Chavez that we got some complaints about being a lumber yard. Maybe they should work that out.
Not on the agenda. Okay. Okay. Thank you all. Our meeting is adjourned.